Okay, it is 5:01, and I would like to call the regular Sonora City Council meeting to order for Monday, June 21st, 2021 at 5 p.m. Pledge of Allegiance. Ann, would you lead us tonight?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Okay, roll call, please.
Mayor Hawkins,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Plummer,
Here.
Councilmember Sickerstrom, Councilmember Such,
Here.
and Councilmember Garavenda appears to be absent.
Okay, hopefully he will be here soon. Okay, city clerk's report on agenda posting.
The agenda was posted on Thursday, June 17th at 4 p.m.
Okay, thank you. Approval of agenda. Council members, everything looks good? Okay, Mr. Mayor Pro
I
Tem.
would like to ask if we could pull the draft ordinance amending the transit resident use permit until next meeting, where we will have people able to come in and actually be present. It's very important to some number of our community, and there are millions of dollars on the line, so to speak. So I think it would be fairest if we just allow them, we're only one meeting away, to allow them to come in and speak to us personally. Most people are way more comfortable doing that.
So without getting into it or debating it right now, Mary Rose, is that even possible for the next meeting?
Well, we did agendize it between 5 and 6 on this agenda. So City Attorney Scott Miller.
Yes, hello.
So quick question for you, sir. We've agendized the study session between 5 and 6 for the public. On the study session, we have a council member that would like to pull it till next meeting. Can I get a legal opinion on that? It is agendized. It is agendized between the hours of 5 and 6 on the agenda.
Correct. You could pull it and have it agendize it for the next meeting, provided it's agendized in time and properly. This is a discussion session tonight. The council will not be taking action, but rather hearing comment and providing any direction if we want to revise the proposed ordinance or any discussion that's out there. So you could continue with your discussion tonight, or you could pull it, but there's no action being taken, as I understand it, tonight that would vote on adopting the ordinance one way or the other.
That is correct.
Really, yes. So to give you a short answer here, yes, you can pull it. And if you do, if you'd rather discuss it, or if you determine that you would like to discuss it, you could do that as well.
Councilmember Such.
I just, I think that there are people perhaps on tonight who signed up who are here because of this. So is that fair to them is one question. And also, does that put short-term rentals in a longer state of just of no man's land or something?
Yes, it would. So it would push back the ability for us to notice the public hearing in front of the Planning Commission, which would then push back the ability for it to come as a first and second reading here in front of the council. Right. And part of the discussion, and we're not on this item right now, but is looking at that timeline.
Okay. The reason for my reticence here, and I'd love to just discuss it, is that usually after staff gets it, after our discussion, it comes back in some form that almost always gets approved. And that will be essentially a final draft from what I understand. Am I incorrect in that?
So yes, and because we're not talking about the items, City Attorney Scott Miller, I just want to make sure I'm not violating Brown Act on the agendized item. But yeah,
Sure.
so right now what's the item that's agendized is merely a draft asking for direction. So it still has quite a bit of process to come back before the council before it goes for approval from the first and the second reading.
That's correct.
Oh, Councilmember Sagestrom.
So I was unaware, is the next meeting that we are now opening to the public as of July 6th?
Yes. Okay. Okay, so, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, are you still of the opinion you would like to?
If it's not going to come back with a resolution that we are going to vote up and down on, then I'm happy to talk about it. There are several issues that I think are important and that will be worth discussing. And I am thrilled to discuss it. It's just that I know many of the members of the public who are interested in this particular item feel much more comfortable in person when they come to talk with us than on Zoom. I know almost nobody who's really all that comfortable on Zoom. So I'm just trying to make it as fair as possible. But if this is 3 or 4 different meetings away from actually being approved, then I'll withdraw that.
Yes, again, this is just a draft based on the direction given by the council on May 3rd, just a draft before it goes to the planning commission. It would still require first and second reading of the council.
And I
That's
think,
correct. Yes.
Go ahead, Councilmember Sapp.
and I think we have a duty not to just approve, if we don't agree. I mean,
Well, I quite agree with you there. It's
I
just that
don't think that needs to be. I don't know.
And it's my understanding that it has to go through the
Planning
planning commission before it even comes back to the
Mhm.
council. So it seems to me there's plenty of opportunity for discussion, including tonight.
well, let's discuss it then.
Okay, so it sounds like we're going to discuss it then so we won't pull it. Okay, so
Not for vaccinated persons.
So non-vaccinated persons are supposed to wear a mask.
Are supposed to, yes.
okay. What the vaccinated? Okay, Mary Rose, if you'd like to explain that, we can talk all about. I don't know when is the appropriate time to talk about that since it's not on the agenda. Would that be at the
Probably
end?
at the end of the meeting, yes.
That'll be cool. Okay, so public comment.
That's why I'm here. That it's a good meeting. If they're not vaccinated, you're not wearing masks.
I would like to address the council.
Okay, we're going to be getting to that point in just a minute.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so public comment on non-agenda items. The public may address the council on any item of public interest, not otherwise on the agenda, that is within the jurisdiction of the city. No action may be taken. Matters may be addressed, may be referred to city staff or placed on a subsequent meeting agenda. Speakers are limited to a 3-minute presentation. I understand there's definitely going to be some people speaking tonight, which is great. We invite that. I would like to let the public know that legally council members are not allowed to essentially have a conversation or answer. So if things come up, we're not allowed to answer that. I just want to let the public know that. So we will look for a raising of hands.
So if you would like to make public comment on non-agendized items, please raise your hand using the raise your hand feature or dial *9 if you are on a phone line. At this time, council members, your first public comment is coming from Karen Wood.
Okay, go ahead, Karen.
I thank you for taking my comment. Democracy is a form of government that includes all people. The purpose of social equity work is to ensure that all people, especially those who are marginalized, are given a seat at the table and that their voices are heard and valued. For people who have been excluded from participating in the past to feel comfortable participating, they must feel safe. When people feel threatened, bullied, and intimidated, they do not feel safe. The behavior exhibited at the last social equity meeting by a committee member was unacceptable. The city council needs to review what is acceptable behavior and take steps to ensure the emotional and physical safety of all committee members. No one should be allowed to threaten, bully, and intimidate others. Also, when members of the city council are seen texting during meetings, it appears as if public meetings have been taken private. I believe all conversations should be openly spoken between council members and between council members and the audience. This ensures that all people have the ability to comment on what is being discussed between council members or council members and the audience. Thank you.
Thank you.
Your next public speaker is from Pat.
Go ahead, Pat.
Okay. Good evening. My name is Pat Cervelli, and I am a member of the Mother Logan Martin Luther King Committee and have been since 2003. I would like to read a letter that the committee sent to the city council members in January. We haven't heard anything back, so I thought I would read it in public comment. Dear City Council members, the Mother Logan Martin Luther King Jr. Committee is writing in support of the Social Equity Committee continuing as a City Council Committee. The MLK Committee has been focusing on the legacy of Dr. King for 26 years since our founding in 1995. At our annual MLK birthday celebration, we present a program that honors the life of Dr. King and the ideals he embodied through his work. The program is attended by about 550 people who filled the seats at the Sonora High Auditorium. Sadly, we had
Pat, Mr. Valley, Ms. Cervelli.
program due to COVID-19. Dr. King was primarily a nonviolent activist who led a movement for social change. The MLK Committee strives to inspire the community to take action towards social justice, acceptance of diversity, and equality for all. We were so encouraged when the City Council had bravery to face the issue of social equity, modeling with honesty, integrity, and kindness how we can create a version of MLK's ideal of the beloved community right here in Sonora. Council,
30 seconds.
yes. Yes. Do you hear me?
Yeah, yes, keep
Hello?
going. We're definitely still listening.
Okay. Are you not hearing me?
We did hear your comment. Your bandwidth was low. Your public comment period has ended at this time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hello?
Well, Ms. Cervelli, if you can hear us, can you resend that in an
Can
email
anyone
like
hear
you
me?
had said before? Please?
Oh, that's strange.
Cool.
Hmm.
Then we'll have to go on to the next.
Don't know.
Yeah,
I don't have access.
yeah. Okay.
Your
wait,
next public,
No,
Yeah.
in the middle of the letter.
Chris.
Okay,
I'm assuming they're not hearing me and I'm not
Okay, so-
hearing
Can
anything.
you
Really
mute her?
bad
Chris?
Yeah.
connection.
Thank
Do
you,
you
Chris.
hear me?
You're,
So there's so much delay in the
What
system
happened?
that we're talking past each
oh,
other.
got it.
Yeah,
Okay.
So your
I
next public
I
speaker,
don't know where I stopped. Okay.
oh
Yeah.
gosh.
Okay, I've been asking if you heard me and I didn't hear anybody.
yeah.
The
So,
council has shown-
Ms. Cervelli, if you do hear us, could you please send that into an email, or you're more than welcome to call any one of us? I guess your bandwidth was low. I do apologize, but I really do
well-
value what you say.
All right, about half of it I wasn't able to get through.
So,
So your next public speaker, I believe if you can scroll up, Chris,
Yeah.
for me.
I
Is for
I
Thomas
just
Silva.
wanted to read it. The public heard it. It basically, the committee, our committee for social equity.
love
Can you
technology
guys,
sometimes.
can you guys hear me?
Yes, Thomas, we can hear you.
Yes, go ahead, Thomas.
All right, cool. Good evening, guys. Hey, I just wanted to say thank you to the council members who voted to let us have Bradford Street on the second Saturday. It was great for our restaurant, or for the brewery, you know, as far as our revenues. It's going to really help us kind of get back on track for what we've lost. So just that one day a month is huge. It was a success. It really was, with the diverse crowd and just the exciting atmosphere. It was cool. So I just wanted to say thanks for that. And also, I also wanted to point out about, it was like 9:10 or so at night, and we had the road opened up, and here comes Councilmember Garaventa coming up Washington Street, hauling butt on Bradford Street, then turns left on Green Street, and I see him come back up Washington Street about a minute later. And I just thought it was kind of I just wanted to remind him that he's not above the law, and I should have called you in that night, but here's your warning. Don't do that again. It was not okay. So the other thing I'd like to say is I did speak with Mary Rose, and apparently you guys are in ongoing negotiations with our police department, as you do every year, or I don't know if you do it how often, but I feel like I'd like to see them get more funding if we can find it. Really push, to have those men and women get a little bit better pay, and then also some updated vehicles and equipment. They're driving around 2004 Crown Vics still, and people come into our city, and I really feel that they do look at a law enforcement and what they're driving, and it really shows how much we care about our city. And I want that to be I'd like it to be discussed about more. If we can find it in our budget, maybe make that more of a priority for our fire and our police. But anyway, thanks. Second Saturday was a blast, and we have another cool band coming out the next one, July 10th. So thanks.
Thanks, Thomas.
Mr. Mayor, if I will, my discussion with Thomas was on item number 7 of the agenda, not at all about SPOA negotiations. I just want that
Okay.
on the record.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, that's, yeah.
Your next public speaker is from the last 4 digits of 3234. If you are on a phone line of 3234, please dial *6 to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, this is Susan from Sonora, and I'm here today to speak about the notion that Tuolumne County and Sonora has a problem with white supremacy and is in need of critical race theory. Any such language regarding critical race theory and white supremacy should not be adopted into our county government policies. This is nonsense. I would love to see the evidence showing all the white supremacists and racists in our community. I would like to see the statistics that should warrant any action in this direction. I haven't met any white supremacists or met any racists since I moved here almost 8 years ago. and I know a lot of people. In fact, what I see is a caring and loving community with a few outliers that may include a handful at most of a few what might be true racists, or like some people like to say, rednecks. We have a population of 5,000 in Sonora and 50,000 in all of Tuolumne County. And how many would you say are rednecks or white supremacists? 5, 10? What I think is going on here with the Social Equity Committee is if you don't agree with their ideology, if you've come from a God-fearing family with traditional values, or God forbid you voted for Trump, then you're called a white supremacist. And this isn't right. Please just stop this. This is a great community. And I'll finish there. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan.
Your next public speaker is from Megan Mills.
Go ahead, Megan.
Hi, thank you. Can I be heard?
Yes, very loudly.
Oh, good. Okay, I'll try to keep it acceptable. My name is Megan Mills. Greetings, Mayor Hawkins, Mayor Pro Tem Plummer, Council Members Garaventa, Segerstrom, and such. On Monday, June 14th, 2021, at the Social Equity Committee, SEC meeting, I witnessed an appointed committee member stand from his chair, raise his voice to the rest of the committee and public, and state, quote, blank this, I'm done. You guys don't want to listen to blank I have to say anymore, unquote. He continued to stand, swear, and behave in an aggressive manner for the next several minutes. This can be seen on the recording at the 1 hour, 42-second mark of the meeting. This individual repeatedly disrupts the process and work of the Social Equity Committee. He dominates the 1 hour meeting and obstructs real progress in accomplishing the mission of the SEC. The City of Sonora's own code of ethics states that city staff and elected officials will be dedicated to the concept of delivering effective and efficient city services in a courteous and non-discriminatory manner, and be dedicated to handling problems on the basis of principle, justice, and civility. If the SEC as a committee of the Sonora City Council is under the purview of these ethical codes, I believe they have been violated repeatedly. This is a pattern of behavior by this individual which occurs frequently. The behavior on Monday was at an elevated, more extreme level than in past meetings. However, the raised voice, interruptions, and dominating the meeting with his behavior happens with alarming frequency with no apparent consequences or accountability. It is my understanding that this behavior continued in an increasingly threatening manner after the meeting ended and the recording stopped. The fact that this is not the first, second, or even third time that this individual has interrupted the process, behaved inappropriately, and without consequence indicates that the council is tacitly condoning this behavior. Silence by the council implies consent. This has been allowed to go on for months, creating fear and mistrust among committee members and the public. Some SEC committee members have shared that they plan to attend all future meetings via Zoom only indefinitely because they do not feel safe. Let me say that again, they do not feel safe. The council needs to take decisive, immediate action against the verbally abusive behavior. Threats of any kind should not be tolerated. The people in power don't see the climate that this continually loud behavior is causing. There are some that are trying to bring light to the situation, but are afraid of repercussions.
30 seconds.
Being on a public committee should not subject members to feeling that they will be threatened or that their life may be in danger. This is unacceptable. The City Council would do well to review and enforce their own stated mission, values, and code of ethics in regard to this kind of behavior and the amount of time one person has taken from an otherwise civic process. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan.
Your next public speaker is from Tracy Glusinski.
Go ahead, Tracy, we're listening.
Thank you for allowing me to speak. In February of 2019, my grandson, Colton Sparks, was presented to Adventist Health in Sonora, barely clinging to life. His condition required him to be meta-flighted to UC Davis. I believe that the hospital and law enforcement had a courtesy agreement to call local law enforcement when this type of case happened. For some reason, this didn't happen for Colton. In the interest of our community, to have an ordinance to require notification to SPD due to any non-accidental trauma should be reported to CPS and SPD. Any child brought in that condition is a crime. Due to the absence of this ordinance, SPD missed out on the following for my grandson's case. Number one, the mindset of the accused. Number 2, crime scene evidence. Number 3, possibility of the accused being under the influence of any substances. Due to the situation, it took over 2 years for an arrest and gave the suspect time to hire a lawyer, and is still, almost 3 years later, not given a single statement. Colton's family and SPD worked diligently just to get an arrest. With the situation of our case, we do not wish any other family to suffer from this. The support of SPD, the Sheriff's Department, we are also working with state people, but we believe to do our community justice and other victims, we need an ordinance to protect our children, because right now they're not being protected. The offenders are being protected. And so with that, we would like to suggest that we create a city ordinance with Adventist Health that would require them with non-accidental trauma, especially the severe case that my grandson was brought into, not only call CPS, which is required by law, but there's no time frame. It says when possible. The CPS does not come out in the middle of the night. And my grandson was not abused. He was a victim of homicide. There's a difference. There's an actual crime committed. And those crimes need to be looked at right away for the integrity of the
30 seconds.
So with that being said, along with SPD, the Sheriff's Department, and our community, we would like to request that you consider an ordinance that would request when a child comes in with non-accidental trauma, that law enforcement be notified. Thank you.
Thank you.
Your next public speaker is from Terry.
Go ahead, Terry.
Good afternoon, council members, and thank you for taking my comment today. I would like to share some concerns I have about the last Social Equity Committee and aggressive behavior displayed by an appointed committee member. I felt that this type of behavior was inappropriate, unprofessional, and I would like to know how the council members are going to address this type of behavior in the future. What is the protocol for holding committee members accountable when they are not treating other members of the committee or the public who are attending with respect? I attend these meetings, the Social Equity Committees, on a regular basis because this is an issue that I care deeply about. I don't feel I am not pushing any agenda as I am sometimes accused of. And there is racism and discrimination in this county because I hear the stories from people who live in the community. I attend that of a deep hope, and I want every member of this community and every visitor of this community to feel that they can live safely here when they are visiting or living here. I request that an agenda item be added to the next meeting to address protocol around aggressive behavior, holding committee members accountable, and a review of the Brown Act rules of conduct. Thank you.
Thank you.
Your next public speaker is from Peter Kendall.
Go ahead, Peter.
Good evening. I watched last week's Social Equity Committee's meeting twice, and it was a sickening display of arrogance and self-indulgent groupthink. I witnessed several committee members, notably Colette Such, Mercedes Toon, and Nikki Coleman, do their best to squelch the comments made by fellow committee member Darren Duaz. Darren's sincere concern about public reaction to using the term white supremacy culture was met with claims that Darren was taking too much time. You tried to silence Darren, to cancel him. You bullied him. I witnessed Nikki Coleman patronizingly lecture Darren in a very condescending, passive-aggressive way about him holding all the cards because he's white. Ms. Coleman then declared, "I don't think this is productive anymore." Colette Such further provoked Darren by saying, "You don't have to hit all of us with an automatic weapon, including those who call in." Mercedes Toon frequently interrupted Darren as he was speaking. I even heard another committee member claim Tuolumne County is known for white supremacy and for the jail, to which none of you objected. Shameful. And white supremacy culture is just one of the many negative, peculiar, poorly defined phrases and words you employ. Equity, social justice, white privilege, white fragility, critical race theory, systemic racism, lived experience. You have invented your own linguistic babble. We don't need to read a book from Ibram X. Kendi to understand you. You just need to speak clearly and tell the truth. I think your goal is to radicalize our community and introduce your critical race theory into our schools and government. Find some other place to peddle it. It won't sell here. This whole idea of a resolution was pushed by Colette Such after George Floyd died. Instead of adopting either of two resolutions crafted a year ago, your committee has morphed into a year-long series of self-indulgent, virtue signaling sessions with no boundaries and no end in sight. Now, you'll likely end up with your resolution, no doubt, but we know it doesn't stop with a resolution. Just like in many other parts of the country, your small nucleus of a resolution drafting group generates its own centrifugal force. We see the exact same phenomenon wherever radicals are allowed to take root. Ever-increasing demands to incorporate your Marxist ideology into our lives.
30 seconds.
Let me be clear. Blaming our citizens for evils they did not commit based on their race, color, or ethnicity is morally wrong and will result in deep resentment, further division, and maybe even civic disorder. It has no place in Tuolumne County. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter.
Your next public speaker is from Thad Waterbury.
Go ahead, Thad.
Am I unmuted?
Yes.
Okay, good. I watched the last social equity meeting a week or so ago, and I found that Darren Duez's behavior was just abhorrent. And his threatening to leave, his standing, his interrupting, not practicing active listening where you try to understand what's being said. I urge the city council to review his participation in that meeting because it's not productive. Thank you.
Thank you, Thad.
Your next public speaker is from Elizabeth.
Hi,
Go ahead,
yes.
Elizabeth.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great. Thank you for taking my comment. I just want to say that I too saw this, witnessed the behavior of Darren Duez at the Social Equity Committee last week, and I too was appalled by his behavior. And also, when I listened and watched it again, I saw that the council members at the not last caller, but the caller before last, stated, Mercedes, Nikki, and Colette Such, we're trying to push in a radicalized agenda. That's just radically false. This gentleman has an idea of how he wants his county to be and has no idea of how to achieve that other than through lots of threats and bullying. So I take offense to that because I believe that the majority of the Social Equity Committee is committed to doing their best to bring a resolution to the table for all to approve. I believe that we need to follow the Brown Act, make sure that it is a civil discourse, not an uncivil tantrum that such as we witnessed last week. So thank you for taking my comments. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And just to let everyone know, if you've already spoken, you can only speak once during the public comment.
Your next public speaker is from David Tichenal.
Go ahead, Dave.
Okay, I should be unmuted. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Dave.
Okay, great. Hi, glad to be able to call in tonight. I was rushing to get home. I'm just going to refer back to the same video that everybody else is referring back to. And I also want to go back and talk about last year when there was the BLM protest down at the park. And the night before, there was some 400 to 500 people showed up at the Willow Springs Clubhouse Park there. Some of them were State of Jefferson people, but the whole thing got labeled as a State of Jefferson organized event, and it wasn't. There was a lot of concerned people there that were afraid to that the county and the city of Sonora might be entering into the same thing that was going on in other larger urban areas. And so we got together with the sheriff and with the police chief of Sonora to discuss what was being done to make sure everybody's safety could be guaranteed down there. But after that event, there was a lot of racial things being slung back towards the state of Jefferson and towards me personally. I was called a white supremacist. I was called a skinhead. I was called lots of different names. And at that time, like I have in the past, I've challenged anybody to show in writing or in a recording anything that I've ever done that would show that I am a racist or that I am a white supremacist or anything else. You can't do it because that's not who I am. And I've never made those kind of comments or never organized those kind of events. The state of Jefferson is an organization purely about representation, and it has to do with the republic that the United States is. We are not a democracy, we are a representative republic, and we're trying to restore that in California. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody was clear that this shouting of racism, this accusing of white supremacy comes from, you know, a direction that really is unbecoming to those people who actually do support what they say they support in the BLM and in the social justice equity group or a social equity group. And so, and the last thing was when I was watching that meeting, I know I have to hurry here. I was watching that meeting from the other night at the city council equity meeting. I was reminded of a movie called Ascent of a Woman and Al Pacino's portrayal of Slade in that movie. And he says some really profound things. And at one point he stands up and he's very angry at the whole group. And he says, if I was the man I was 5 years ago, I'd take a flamethrower to this place.
30
and
seconds.
I kind of felt the same metaphorical way that equity meeting, social equity meeting, really has to go away. It's not accomplishing any goals, and that's all I'll say tonight.
Thank you, Dave.
And I don't know, Pat, I believe, did you speak previously?
The one that's raising their hand, Pat.
Can you unmute them, Chris?
Is this the same Pat that spoke previously?
You have not entered any numbers.
Okay, I'm sorry. You didn't hear me the last time, so I'm wondering, can I do it again? Can I give it another try? Can you try? Can you hear me now?
Hey, this is one thing
Can you
it's up to the
hear me?
council.
But you can,
It's up
is
to
that
the,
correct?
Yeah,
the mayor.
if Ms. Cervelli speaks again, that is, I mean, we could do that either way, but we'd have to allow everyone else to speak again also.
Well, and you had.
Well,
suggested
you could not hear me is my understanding.
that
I
she
don't
could
think they can
resend the
hear me.
letter.
I was gonna do it on the phone.
Okay.
Remember. Yep. And it would.
Yeah,
be
I'll
easy.
send a letter. I give up.
Thank
Okay.
you. I actually would like to speak to you, Ms. Cervelli. So, okay, do we have anyone else?
Yes, public speaker, Darren Duez.
Go ahead, Darren.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So I've sat here and listened to a couple of them. I've seen a couple people send me emails in support and emails in non-support of the Social Equity Committee. I'm committed to this. People aren't going to ruffle my feathers, and you know, everyone wants to complain and whine that I talk about, you know, uneducated things on social equity. Okay, well, I haven't had 20 years or 30 years of being in this system to do it. So when I start asking questions, I start asking questions for the lay person so that when they ask me questions, they can get understanding. Again, this committee is comprised of a majority of liberal, progressive people. So to get conservatives in and listening, we got to be pretty lay because they don't understand a lot of this stuff sometimes. Some do. I spoke with a very, very prestigious college professor, which I know Colette spoke with as well, who actually said to her that we can't do this. If you have to put a color before a statement, whether that color is white, black, brown, green, or blue, you're a racist. I never have to do anything like that. All I want to get done is a resolution. And I'm going to tell you now, if you 7 liberals that get on every single time and gripe and moan that you can't get your way, people are just going to wipe their bottoms with this resolution and throw it away. I want people to read it. I want people to understand it. I want to see people go through these motions with us to understand it, not generally just put a nice piece of paper and some verbiage in a file somewhere. I've been talking about that since day one. All these 7 liberals and all these 7 progressives that are out that are pushing this, and sorry, I'm not pigeonhole everyone, I don't know, but that's my guess. They seem to push the same narrative every single time. Let's silence Darren. Let's calm him down. Yeah, I get pissed off. I had a very good comment. We shouldn't be using the term white supremacy. Jim Garaventa said we should use supremacy culture. I'm in 100% agreement with him. But yet, instead of saying, hey, let's have a general conversation, it was shouted down and told me I have a white privilege card, and that's where I've made it. That's why I get so mad. You're taking away from everything that I've done to tell me I'm white. Why I'm successful is because of the color of my skin. That's a racist comment. That is pigeonholing me.
30 seconds.
I have never done that to anyone. I am committed to this group. And if you don't want to show up because you feel threatened or because we get in discourse or conversation that you don't like, that just goes to show that you don't want a seat in here and you don't want to get to the bottom. You don't want to hear an opposition. You don't want to hear another person's opinion. You just want to push your narrative. We should all be sitting together and talking. I don't get mad if you get mad at me. Let's sit down and have a conversation. Let's not push this. Oh my God,
Darren, your time is up.
All right, thank you.
Cool. Thank you, Darren.
Your next public speaker is from Teresa Blackwood.
Go ahead, Teresa. Teresa, we are listening.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Teresa.
Hello?
We can hear you.
Okay, I'm sorry. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen to us all today. I hear we have a lot of complaints and I wish you guys good luck on all that. One of the things that I would just like to say, and I have been saying it for 2.5 years, and it is justice for Colton. I would like to say that throughout the 2 years, we have been yelling out for help. We finally got our arrest, and we are so very grateful to SPD, to Rue, to Ashley Brandow, Hankins, to Wirtz, to all of them for the work that they were allowed to do. I just want to say that I've been before the city council and I've been before the board of supervisors a couple times. Everybody's seen me on the corner with a sign. I haven't had very many people try to help us so far. I really would appreciate it, and my family and the families of our community would be eternally grateful if you guys could pass some kind of city ordinance to get our children the safety that they need. I know that all of you guys have kids, and this very situation could happen to anyone in your family. I just want to say again, thank you very much, and justice for Colton. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa.
All right. Bye-bye.
Your next public speaker is from the last 4 digits, 5354. If you're with the last 4 digits of 5354, please dial *6 to unmute yourself.
5354, please unmute yourself. Or *9.
*6.
*6, excuse me. I get them confused.
Okay, it finally unmuted. Third try.
Yes.
Okay. Regarding the situation with Darren, he was needled a lot that night. And then to hear the responses as though there were death threats and people are afraid, and, oh my goodness. You know, they've been taking cheap shots at the guy continuously, not just this meeting. It's gone on for a long time because I guess he just doesn't comply with the groupthink, and he doesn't necessarily say what he's supposed to say and have all the little cliches. You know, you have a person who calls themselves an illegal immigrant in your house and you refer to them as such, you ought to be able to do that. Because if I was to walk in there and call myself a Chinese trans lesbian, you'd have to accept all of that. And I'd be able to compete with your daughter and shower with her in the locker room. Otherwise, you're a transphobe and you're a homophobe and a racist. Okay? Some of us are getting tired of the double standards. So the guy calls the man an illegal immigrant because his immigration status, he didn't jump through all the hoops. And we get the cliche back at him about no person is illegal. Okay? That kind of little thing over and over and over. And these people are so pure. Why? Why did he get upset? It's because he's being bullied from all sides. That's why. And to any of you in the audience listening, if you've been bullied in the past, you had a hard time, take care that you do not become the thing you hate, because I think there's a whole lot of that going around. That's it for tonight.
Thank you.
At this time, council members, I don't see any additional public comment.
Okay, thank you everyone for your comments. Again, I'd just like to remind the public that as council members and city staff, we are not allowed to answer anything that has been spoken about. We can do that on an agendized item, or you are more than welcome to email or call us individually. I would love to hear from all of you.
Or respond at reports time.
Yes, yes. Yeah, that's true too. So, or respond at reports time, as Councilmember Garaventa just reminded me. Okay, so on to consent calendar. Items on the consent calendar considered routine and will be voted on in one motion unless a council member or members of the public has a question or wishes to discuss an item. In that case, the item will be removed from the consent calendar and considered separately. Any questions or comments on the consent calendar, council members? Okay, any public comment on the consent calendar? Don't see any hands raised, so we'll bring it back to the council for a motion and or a second.
I'd like to move to approve the consent calendar. I will second that.
Okay, motion by Councilmember Garaventa, seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Plummer. Roll call vote, please. Blah.
Mayor Hawkins?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Plummer?
Aye.
Councilmember Garaventa?
Aye.
Councilmember Segerstrom?
Aye.
And Councilmember Such?
Aye.
Okay. Passes 5-0. Short-term rentals study session. This is a study session, meaning we are not voting on something tonight, but we're looking to get lots of public outreach and input. So I will read this part out. Received a draft ordinance 880 and provide staff direction regarding amendments to chapter 17.64 transient use permit of the Sonora Municipal Code to revise regulations on short-term rentals. Mary Rose.
All right, good evening, council members. The item before you is a draft of ordinance 880, which is amending chapter 17.64, which is your transient residential use permit ordinance. And this item is being brought back in front of you as directed by the council on the May 3rd, 2021 agenda, which at that point asked for a draft to be reviewed prior to Planning Commission recommendation. And we'll kind of go through the timeline as we get to the end of this presentation. So again, the draft of the ordinance is in your packet as well as your agenda item. So just to kind of go over how many times the council has talked about the short-term rental amending chapter 17.64 and the direction that the council has provided staff. So on February 22nd, 2021, the City Council approved the 2020 Sonora goals and objectives, which included exploring all opportunities to provide best practice and dignified solutions of our growing, hold on just a second, our growing homeless population and low income and affordable housing needs. At this time, this obviously was a public meeting, and the public were obviously invited to comment on this particular goal that was approved by the City Council. And then on March 15th, the City Council directed staff in a public meeting to agendize at a future meeting for discussion and possible action amending Chapter 17.64 of the Sonora Municipal Code to limit short-term rentals in the city of Sonora. At that meeting, we talked about the housing crisis in which the city of Sonora, the state of California, and pretty much the rest of the United States at this point is under at this. And at that time, they directed staff to bring forth an ordinance to limit short-term rentals within the city of Sonora. Again, it was a public meeting in which public comment was given. On April 5th, 2021, the City Council approved a moratorium on all new transient residential use permits in the city of Sonora until further direction was given. This was in regards to the run on applications that city staff had received. And again, on April 5th, that was a public meeting with public comment received, and the council voted unanimously to approve a moratorium on all new transient use permits effective March 6, 2021. On April 19th, the City Council approved the 2021 strategic plan, which included the action item, address barriers to long-term housing such as review and modification of the city's transient residential use permit or short-term rental program. Again, this was a public meeting in which public comment was solicited in regards to this item. And then again, on May 3rd, the City Council received a lengthy study session prepared by staff on the short-term rental situation in the city of Sonora and also within the state of California, and gave staff direction to draft an ordinance for review. And what is enclosed and included in your draft ordinance is based on the direction given to staff by the City Council on May 3rd. So the direction, specifically why the council wanted to limit or amend Chapter 17.64. It was discussed on May 3rd that we wanted to allow limited short-term rental uses while preventing the loss of housing stock to directly address the housing crisis in which, and the housing affordability crisis in which the residents of Sonora are under at this point. And so they asked staff to draft an ordinance specifically looking at allowing limited rental uses while preventing the loss of housing stock. And we went into detail during that study session of what that would look like. That would look at primary residency, limits to the number of rentals that are available within the city of Sonora, looking at unhosted rentals and so forth. The number two, the direction was to preserve residential character and establish operating standards to reduce potential noise, parking, traffic, property maintenance, and safety impacts on adjacent neighbors. And you had your fire chief get up and talk about the fire safety regulations that needed to be incorporated into this ordinance to ensure fire safety and safety standards in general in regards to amending this chapter. We also talked about the parking issues we're having with allowing for Airbnb guests to be parked on the streets in our already overcrowded parking. And so the council had directed that we look at bringing back an ordinance to address specifically the parking and the traffic and the property maintenance as well. And then lastly, we talked about that there was a lack of an enforcement mechanism within our current ordinance to track and enforce requirements as needed. And again, on May 3rd, the council directed staff to bring forth an ordinance that provided an enforcement mechanism. We talked about how there were 36 permitted current Airbnb short-term rentals within the city of Sonora, although within the last 12 months, we had actively seen about 46, therefore 10 being active and open and receiving revenue without a permit from the city of Sonora. And thus, because there's no enforcement mechanism, there was no way to be able to enforce our permitting structure on those that do not follow that structure. So what is in our current Chapter 17.64? And we talked about this again in the study session, but just for a refresher, your current ordinance was enacted on February, or approved on February 2nd, 2015, and an adopted ordinance number 824. And again, we talked about at that time, it was really ahead of its time. Many cities were not looking at any type of permitting structure. Obviously, since about 2018, short-term rentals have ballooned across the country, but really within the state of California. And other cities now have been enacting stricter regulations than in which the city of Sonora had enacted back in 2015. We also talked about back in 2015, there were only about 5 short-term residential units within the city. And again, back in 2019, we had saw about 46. So within the span of 4 years, we saw that increase. It requires a transient use permit and in some cases a business license. The renewal permit period, it begins on July 1st. There is payment of transient occupancy tax required for those that have a short-term rental. And there is a requirement of an on-call representative to manage property within 30 minutes anytime the property is occupied for transient use. And the maximum number of occupants currently right now in our ordinance are 2 persons per bedroom plus 1 additional person per parcel. And we're going to just kind of, when we get into it, draw your attention to that additional person per parcel because we currently have short-term rentals that have multiple units on a parcel. So we wanted to kind of clean up that language and in discussion and kind of what was directed again from the May 3rd meeting. That language is cleaned up in that draft ordinance presented to you right now. So when we look at what this draft ordinance again it is, allowing for limited short-term rental uses while preventing housing stock. So the direction by the council on May 3rd was to look at a primary residency requirement. That is limiting short-term rentals to primary residence where the homeowner is living and can provide that it is a primary resident within that unit. This provides and ensures that a short-term rental are not displacing city residents from existing housing. As we talked about it in the study session, we were seeing many properties sold as second homes or vacation rentals within the city of Sonora, and then that were being somewhat flipped into Airbnb type rentals and displacing residents here within the city of Sonora from rental units and from additional housing units. And then we also talked about limiting unhosted short-term rentals. I put some definitions there on the side for you. So the council directed, and we had a person comment on the last study session that she was an educator. She had a primary residency, but she has the ability in the summertime to be away from her unit and wanting to rent it as a short-term rental. And so we looked at ways in which limiting unhosted short-term rentals to take into account those particular residents within the city of Sonora that have a particular set of time in which they are gone from their residency. So this would limit unhosted rentals to 120 days per year. It would require the homeowner to physically occupy a short-term rental for at least 245 days per calendar year, ensuring that short-term rentals are not displacing city residents from existing housing stock. But then also, like we talked about, respecting those residents that are away from their properties for a season, for a summer season or a winter season or whatnot. So again, looking at what the draft ordinance is, preserving your residential character and establishing operating standards. There is a prohibition on special events that is in your draft. So those would incorporate weddings, commercial events, etc. That would have an impact on the residential character and the residential nature of homes around it. We also talked about on-site parking requirements. So we did, in the draft presented to you, have a requirement of on-site parking. Now we know that's quite hard and difficult on some of the short-term rentals, specifically within our downtown area because of the lack of on-site parking. So there is a caveat within the ordinance that allows for a potential applicant to work with city staff to identify that there is not availability of on-site parking, but those would be on a case-by-case basis. So currently, within the ordinance, there is an on-site, or excuse me, within the draft, there is an on-site parking requirement for guests and allowing hosts to park on the street. However, there is that exemption for those hosts that do not have on-site parking. And then the trash collection requirement with the city franchisee. So it would require that all Airbnb short-term rental permit holders would have trash collection services through the city franchisee, which is currently Waste Management. And then we talked at length about the fire safety requirement, working fire extinguishers, smoke alarms, and so forth, and provides for a fire inspection by the Sonora Fire Department, which was something that your fire chief stated needed to be done because it is a requirement of other businesses such as hotels and and bed and breakfasts. So this would be a requirement of any new air or short-term rentals. It would also be something that would be required for any current permit holders, that they would need to be able to come into compliance with this particular requirement. And so this would then add a fire inspection feature onto a permit, which then of course adds an additional fee because you are getting a fire inspection like any other business would. And then a local contact person, this is something that is required currently in the ordinance, and it would preserve that we would require any short-term permit holder to have a local contact person in which we can contact them and they would be available within 30 minutes. It does provide an enforcement mechanism to track and enforce requirements. So violations of the ordinance are deemed a public nuisance and subject to chapter 1.20 of the Sonora Municipal Code. There are fines put into this draft ordinance for both property owners and guests. And the fine structure is within the draft ordinance. It's $500 per occurrence and then goes up accordingly in the draft ordinance. And it gives the ability to deny, suspend, and revoke property owners' transient residential use permits for continued violations and non-compliance of a renewal application and fee. So one of the things we talked about on May 3rd was, understandably, we knew that there were some short-term rental permit holders that had closed and not provided any type of renewal fee due to COVID, but that there were others that were not renewing on time and had not renewed for many months. And so this gives the staff the ability to potentially suspend and revoke a property owner's permit for continued violations of non-renewal of application or fees. And as directed, we put in the ordinance an amnesty period and an exemption for current and active transient residential use permit holders. And I just want to state that in the staff report, there is an error on the date that's in the staff report. On the staff report, it says the amnesty period for current short-term rentals with an active transient use permit in good standing as of July 1st, 2020. It is meant to stay July 1st, 2021. So those that are active and current as of July 1st, 2021, they would have an amnesty period of about 90 days to be able to come into compliance with the new requirements as per this ordinance. So again, I apologize for that typo, but it's as of July 1st, 2021. Now that doesn't mean any new permit holders or any new or current active permit holders that are just now trying to get around to renewing. We are currently working with, and I believe we worked with the majority of them that had not renewed their permits due to COVID. We've reached out to them and kind of walk them through the process that if they were closed down due to COVID and they intend to renew, please do so that they would become active as of July 1st. So those would be just for the ones that are current holders and are active and in good standing. And it exempts short-term rentals with an active permit and in good standing as of, again, July 1st, 2021. They'll be exempt from that primary residency requirement. So the primary residency requirement would be for those going forward, addressing specifically what the council had directed staff as that, allowing for not displacing of that housing stock. So again, the current permit holders would be exempt from that primary residency requirement. However, going forward, it'd be a requirement of any new permit holder. And then we want to change the term of the transient use permit program. Right now it expires on June 30th and you must renew by July 1st. Our business licensure program begins January 1st and ends December 31st. So we want to bring it on the same term period. And so this year we're going to allow those that would normally expire as of June 30th to kind of have the amnesty period between June 30th and December 31st. And be able to renew on January 1st so that we're on that same term from our business licensure perspective. So this is just a draft for the council members. I know Mayor Pro Tem Plummer was asking about this earlier. Again, I just want to highlight that this is the fourth time that we have brought forth an ordinance in front of the, or not an ordinance, a discussion about limiting short-term rentals in front of the council, and obviously in a public setting with public comment. Today is that fourth time, and that is just a draft. So we're not asking for any vote at this point. We're simply asking for any direction before the ordinance proceeds to our planning commissioners, and that will be held on July 12th. That would go before the planning commission. So planning commission, this would be a public hearing in front of the planning commission. So there are public hearing date and guidelines that we have to adhere to as far as posting and noticing. So just want to remind the council members of that. And then any recommendation that we receive from the planning commission, the first we have scheduled tentatively, we have scheduled for the first reading of the ordinance in front of the city council from a public hearing perspective on August 2nd, with your second reading and possible adoption on September 7th. And then the ordinance would go into full effect in October of 2021. So again, this is before you in the draft, as per the direction received by staff on May 3rd, and as per the past three meetings received by staff that was presented in front of the city council as I dictated in the beginning of this presentation. So at this time, I will take any comments or review or consideration from council members.
Who would like to go first? Councilmember Segestrom.
Mary Rose, I seem to remember there was a recommended ratio of temporary rentals versus, a per population. Am I wrong about that? Or?
So we did talk about that in the study session. We had talked about different ways, to be able to limit short-term rentals by preventing or allowing for the loss, not allowing for the loss of housing stock. The direction ultimately given to staff was to look at it from a primary residency perspective and not on a limitation on the actual numbers. And this would allow for, any given number of those that have a primary residence. And I'm just going to pull this up for you because we did talk about it. And hold on just a second. I'll share this as well so we can see, because we did talk about it. I'm just going to share. And here, sorry, want to make sure here it is. Maybe not. So in the previous, so in the previous study session on May 3rd, you'll see in the bullets, we talked about primary residency requirement or a numerical limit to how many short-term rentals are within the city. The direction, though, given by the majority of the council members was to limit towards primary residency and not towards numerical limit.
Okay, thank you. And there's no cap discussed here in terms of the number of temporary. I mean, are we going to discuss that? Will that be an issue?
Again, that was not the direction given on May 3rd.
Okay,
that there was not to be a limit or a cap, but to look at it from a primary residency requirement.
Okay, thank you. And then just someone who called me about it, who is a bed and breakfast owner, was saying there's no requirement for pest control or any kind of inspection. Would this be something that other council members would be interested in adding? So that's my comments. Thank you.
That's actually, whoever brought that up to you, I've not thought about that, and that's perfect. The question I have, and I apologize if anybody else was getting ready to speak, but with that, are our hotels in the city required to have pest control? Okay.
Yeah. I'm not aware of that.
Okay.
She said she was required to have pest control.
Yeah.
So that would be interesting. I mean, a B and B would be required, but yet a hotel would not be required.
That's where I'm like, wait a second. So any other?
I would think it'd
council
be,
members?
I would think something that should be across the board myself.
Yeah, that, I'm a little surprised.
I mean, I think we should find out what the requirement is, and it should meet the minimum, the minimum requirements, certainly.
So permitting from the city standpoint or from a state standpoint? From a city standpoint, that's not a requirement of the city. Correct, Rochelle? Yeah.
But, I mean, part of the.
Can you make sure that you're,
I'm sorry. Yes, I sometimes forget other things too. So does the fire inspection that's going to judge for soundness and fire safety, do we need to compel people to do it if the house is sound anyway?
so
I mean,
we currently have ordinances that require fire safety inspection?
well, fire safety,
yeah.
yes, and we are going forward with that. But what I'm asking is, do we need to pile on more rules and regulations for people if these other inspections are assuring the city that the house is sound and otherwise, livable?
I can speak to that. So for your hotels and your bed and breakfasts, there is an annual fire inspection that's done. Or if somebody has a transient use, there's no fire inspection done at all.
But there will be.
Current time. So they would do the same. It'd be a life safety inspection to make sure that you have your, and I'm not a fire chief, he's not here, but I know they look at carbon monoxide, whatever those things are, and your fire alarms, and make sure they have their, if the fire extinguisher is required, they'll look at that, and they'll make sure that exiting, that people can get out if there's a fire. But they're not looking at the soundness of the house, or that's not the kind of inspection. It's just for life safety.
Thank you.
My feeling on that is that it's, just extra meddling. We want to do what's necessary, but to add things kind of just because we have the power to do so, I would prefer not to at this point, unless it's a problem later.
Anyone else?
I mean, I certainly don't want to meddle, but I think if there's a requirement of bed and breakfasts, I don't think it's meddling to have the same requirement of short-term rentals. I'm not big on pest control personally. I don't like spraying poisons all over everything, but if that is a requirement, I think it should be, I think it's, I'll try, I was going to use the word equitable, but I'll try a different word. I just think that that's more fair. that we not burden bed and breakfast in the way that we are not burdening.
Can I just say one thing? If we don't require it at the local on anybody else, where they're getting their pest requirement, I don't know. But we wouldn't want to add it in our ordinance on this because we don't regulate anybody on that. So you wouldn't want, because then we would be treating them differently. And if it's a state requirement, I don't know, but we do not regulate pest control.
Yeah. Well, I know lots of people who prefer not to have extra poisons around their house, and you sort of alluded to that,
totally,
Councilwoman Such. And unless we've, going forward, find a requirement that we'd want to add in because it's necessary, I just didn't leave sleeping dogs lie.
It may be because they serve food. It just hit me from running a restaurant for years. And it may be a requirement from the county if they serve food.
Well, just an add-on, I do have pest control because I have terrible ants and spiders, and I prefer not to live with them. And I also have a cat, and I've asked many times about the toxicity of the spray, which they assure me is pet and human friendly. Although I do close all my windows and bring the cat in when they come.
I'll bet they assure you.
Just my perspective.
I think we're getting off subject, but are restaurants required to do pest control?
Yes.
They have to spray?
Yeah.
Oh.
They'll have to spray, and then like you have bug light, and it's been a few years since I've been in the restaurant, but you have to have like bug lights and that sort of thing when you have a kitchen and a dining room. That way the bugs are attracted away from the food prep area.
Yeah, and she does, yeah, and a bed and breakfast does have to have a state or at least a county inspected kitchen.
Yeah.
Okay. I have a question. I guess it's as much for the council as for staff, if I might, Mr. Mayor.
Oh, go ahead.
And that is on page 16, item C, transient use permit requirements, says that no transient use shall be, a permit shall be issued for any accessory dwelling unit. Is that the mother-in-law cottage, or is that?
Yes, so that's.
Okay, I don't recall that, and I'm just trying to
So we're trying
understand why.
Yeah, so we're trying to become compliant with state law, and I know Rochelle can kind of speak more
Okay.
in regards to that. Rochelle, if you wouldn't mind. There are state laws that are coming out in regards specifically to accessory dwelling units, your ADUs, and being used as a short-term rental. This language that would then kind of put us in the path to be compliant with state law, and I know Rochelle can talk a little bit more about that with you.
Just 1 second to
No,
add
go
in.
ahead.
Well, you'll be able to answer maybe a little better after I
Hopefully.
add to it. And that is, are these accessory units allowed to be rented out long-term?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
The
So
distinction
what
between the junior and the, sorry.
So what we looked at when we talked to Nubia, so your accessory dwelling units, there's a lot of state law that requires the city to allow them. We're required to allow them within setbacks. We're required them to allow, they can alter any building that's on the property and make it an ADU. They have a lot of authority or a lot of state regulation on the city's approval. You have very limited say on when they can be created. So they can be right a lot closer to the property line than you would ever have a normal residential unit. So when we talked to Nubia about, at first we had in there no ADUs and junior, or no ADUs, period. And I said, we could look at allowing it for the junior accessory dwelling units that we also are required to allow by the state. And the way those are set up by the state, you have to live in the residence in order to have them. They have to be within the footprint of the building, and they can be up to 500 square feet. So what we looked at is a compromise, because our hands are pretty tight on ADUs, and really we need those to create our housing requirements that we have with the state, and because we are very limited on what we have ability to create housing in our city. So we are looking at trying to preserve ADUs for those long-term rentals that we need. And there is some, in the state law, it talks about restricting the use of them for short-term rentals, and it talks about that we may. We haven't started our ADU update yet. Should have, but haven't had the opportunity to do so yet. When we look at that, we will follow whatever the state guidance is, but it does conflict in there on whether ADUs have to be restricted from short-term rentals or whether they don't. We'll know that down the road, but we do think that the juniors make sense because it's already within the footprint of the building. It's a smaller unit, and if you want to allow something like that for short-term rentals, staff would recommend that's the direction we went instead of allowing any ADU, because an ADU can be up to 1,200 square feet, a detached ADU, and it can also be 50% of the building. So those are really units that would be well suited for long-term rental.
I'm sorry, I may not be the only one, but I am completely lost with your juniors, your ADUs, within the footprint of the building. Does that mean it has to be a lean-to under the basic roof, or a garage that's 20 feet away, but really on the property?
Right, and it's on the state law, there's junior ADUs. They have to be within the footprint of the building, and they can be in the garage. They can convert their garage for them, and they can only be up to 500 square feet. And they have to reside in in a residence in order to have them. They can't have them unless they reside there, which is similar to what we're doing or recommending with the transient use ordinance. An ADU, on the other hand, under state law, can be as large as the city wants to allow. Right now, we're at 1,200 square feet maximum for a detached. They can convert any structure on their property to that ADU. So if they have a garage, if they have a shop, those can be converted to an ADU. State law requires us to allow that. Doesn't matter if they're right on the property line, we have to allow it.
And that's not discussed here at all, which is why I'm saying, where is this, right?
Right, so we're,
Okay.
under our ordinance, you wouldn't be allowed to do an ADU. You would be allowed to have a junior accessory dwelling unit for transient use. So they could have something within the footprint up to 500 square feet, but they have to live there.
Okay. Now it's a lot clearer.
I'm sorry,
no,
clear,
it's my,
clear as mud, right?
well, it's my ignorance on the terminology and the fact that we're not even discussing it, because I'm thinking of my situation. I don't intend to do it, but I have a garage that already has a toilet, sink, and shower. I mean, if I could stand somebody else on my property, then it would be a really good time to rent it, to fix it up and rent it out.
Yeah.
But it's not attached to the house, which is why I was thinking, I don't even see where this would be allowed, but it's not allowed for short-term rentals, but for long-term rentals.
Long-term rental, you
it would
could do
be
that.
Okay.
Under what's proposed here.
And I'll just say, there's conflicts that we're seeing right now in state law. And so it's saying that it can't be allowed and it's saying it can be allowed. So in order to keep us with the spirit of what the council directed, which was a primary residency, we went with the junior ADU allowing for, but the prohibition on an ADU.
Without that, you would require them either to rent their whole house out when they leave or a bedroom. This gives them the option of having some type of a self-contained unit within their property, within their house.
Councilmember Such.
So within the footprint means that it's part of their house then? It's not.
I'm sorry.
Within the footprint of the house means it's part of the house. It's
Right,
not.
or attached garage. Attached though.
Has to be an attached.
It's under the basic roof.
Yeah, basically under the roof.
Okay. Thank you very much. That is much, much clearer for me, and I hope for everyone else, although may have been the only one pondering it.
No, I actually looked up the government code. So that 65852.2 that's going to be revised.
Right, yeah, we have to revise our whole ordinance.
So I read that whole boring thing for nothing?
Yeah.
I did?
Yeah.
Oh, well.
Well, I in vain looked for ordinance 1.2 for the fine structure, and I'm going to need some hand holding on that because I really wanted to look at it.
So 1.2 is the ability to call it a public nuisance. The fine structure is within the ordinance itself, 880. And that is on page.
Okay, so that's separate from the part of the ordinance where it just refers to it.
Yeah, so in the ordinance itself, it says that it is a misdemeanor or public nuisance to violate any provisions of this chapter and are subject to administrative citation provisions as set forth in chapter 1.2 of this code. That sets forth the administrative citation provisions. However, the fee structure is not in 1.2. That is within the ordinance itself. And that is item E under section 17.64.060, which talks about enforcement. An administrative penalty up to $500 per day may be imposed for each violation of this chapter contained, and up to $1,000 per day for each violation contained in a second or subsequent administrative violation. So that's right there within the ordinance.
Okay, I did read that. I didn't find that. I didn't see the connection between 1.2, and that's whence my question comes. I guess speaking to the council still at this point, I'm typically voice a lot of concern about any any enforcement mechanism that starts saying $500 a day. Because while I don't believe any of our current staff would abuse it, I can easily imagine that type of thing being abused. When you're talking about $1,000 a day, you don't get, I mean, you're away for a weekend or whatever, and it's a $3,000, $4,000 fine. So I think we need to look at that language and say, I mean, because when we talked about it, this was prior to your time here, Mary Rose, when we spoke about it and my concerns with that on the ordinance for, what was it? The cars, trash, things like that, abandoned vehicles, etc. We had that, and the explanation of why it was in there was that it was not per day, but per visit by the inspector. If that is clarified, I can live with that, but a fine that just goes up, I mean, it's issued on a Friday and maybe not even received or able to be dealt with until Wednesday, and that's a minimum $2,500 fine. I don't think that's the spirit of what we're writing, and I would like to have it so that the language doesn't read that way.
So I just want to remind you that there is a requirement of a local contact person for 30 minutes within, so they would have to be within range to be able to address. And specifically, that's why we have the local requirement, local contact person there, so that there are issues, they are within 30 minutes to come and address those issues. And I just will remind the council, we talked about it in length about the ability to be able to enforce any part of this permit program, and not being able to do it in the current ordinance because there was no fine structure or fee structure. So that was something that was directed by the council.
To go from no fly swatter to a bazooka is, I think there's a little room for reasonable enforcement first that would then escalate. Okay, and I'm just one of the council, but that's where I start on any enforcement. We should not start with the hammer to kill the fly. What page?
20.
Right now I'm not on any page. But it was,
yes.
We were talking, what page are the fine structure on?
Yeah, page 20, number E, or letter E, under 1764-060.
I'm getting old here. I need my glasses just to find page numbers, man. Pitiful. Anyway, so those are my feelings on fining strategy.
Okay, any other council members?
Oh, I hope somebody else can take up the.
Well, I guess just to pick up on what Mark just said, that, I mean, there, I guess it's finding the sweet spot of being able to have something enforced without, being draconian, I suppose. However, unfortunately, in this day and age, it seems that larger amounts tend to keep things enforced, as opposed, or else you have to go through a whole process of people, not particularly following what they should be following. So I understand, Mark, your point, but I would have to be convinced, I suppose, a little more to make it a lower at this point, a lower number at this point. And I take your thoughts on, staff now would be reasonable, but perhaps down the road, I take that point, but I think it's been a policy of the city since I was little that that staff has been. I'm searching for the word. I don't want to say. I want to say reasonable, but I want to say works with people, for lack of a better word,
Fair.
term, but to get things enforced in the long run. And I don't see that culture going away anytime soon. So that's my thought.
Councilmember Segerstrom.
Well, I know that $500 does seem perhaps extreme, but we are talking about a for-profit situation here. And these people are making money on renting their homes or junior accessory dwellings or, non-owner occupied dwellings. And as far as I can tell, it's quite a profitable industry. So we need to have a code that has some teeth to it, or we'll end up in the same situation where people were not renewing their permits. And if there is someone within 30 minutes, they should be able to turn this around and be responsible. I mean, so.
Well, I'll return to my starting position then, which is that, see, it's not I mean, $500 to me is a lot of money. Even if you're making good money with anything, it gets most people's attention. To say per day, that, I mean, for a first occurrence, especially when the second occurrence starts at $1,000, $1,000 is serious money to almost everybody nowadays. And I'm just wary of, well, like I say, the language that per day. So, but I'm happy to be outvoted if that's, where the council goes. I'm just raising my personal concerns and resentments for, I realize that this is typical code. That doesn't make it good or right. The other thing that is typical is to say $500 equals 6 months in jail. That's insane. Once upon a time, maybe it did, but I find it very, very difficult. Very easy to vote against things like that with completely out of balance comparisons. When 6 months is worth $500, then I find it, they say, well, it's never going to be used. Well, if it isn't, then it shouldn't be there in the first place. But so.
Well, I don't see the term, the 6 months, it's not in there. Okay, it's not in there. Okay.
I'm just saying that it's typical code.
And the point that I would also make is that it says up to.
Right.
It's not saying it's going to be 500 the first time out, and 1,000 second time out. It's up to. So, and I think that's kind of a maneuver that we don't have to keep rewriting our ordinances all the time to keep up with inflation, for one thing.
Well, if inflation goes where people are predicting, pretty soon that will be a cup of coffee. So, okay.
Councilmember Such.
I just want to, I don't entirely disagree with you, Mark. And I did agree with you about the ordinances for, the home ordinances that we approved a couple of years ago. But with this, and when and maybe Rochelle or Barry Rose can elaborate on this a little bit, but it has examples like too many guests or all of that stuff. Those are, to not abide by those rules is, they know what they're doing. So I don't think 500 is too much. I just don't. I think, if you're going to be running this business, you have to run it within the confines of the city. And to not abide by that is intentional. And it's not a hardship. But I think the home ordinances could impose a hardship on people that they aren't capable of correcting in a day. Right. This one is very different. So I don't have the same.
Okay, and you defend that well
about it. That's all.
So one of my concerns, and I know this with working with my landlord also because he does long-term rentals. But one of the things I don't want to see is someone that is a responsible, and I think this is what Mark was getting to, someone that is a responsible property owner, a responsible Airbnb operator, and they have somebody that comes in, does one wild party, and police are called. People are there within 20 minutes to get everything taken care of. I think what the fear is, if I'm reading you right, Mark, is that they would still get fined $1,000 for, having that, even though the responsible owner came in and did everything right. And I don't want to see somebody get punished for something like that, but, we've seen it, and it's definitely up here. We've seen other irresponsible owners, and I'm not referring to Airbnb owners, because I haven't really seen this personally, but we have irresponsible owners come in, they allow whatever to go on at their properties, and it creates an actual public health hazard, a public nuisance, and many times they're able to just walk away and not care. So I see a happy medium in there, I guess is where I'm going.
So just if I may, Mr. Mayor, so this does allow for the city to fine the guests as opposed to the property owner.
Yes.
Okay.
So it says any person violating, and those limit without limitation to guests, operators, local contact person. So if there's a big party that is unbeknownst to the owner, the city
Okay.
by no means would be fining the property owner. That's why it put that in there, that the guests would also have the ability to be fined
Right.
as well.
And that actually was sort of one of my questions, not the guests taking some responsibility, but I don't know how check-ins go for most of these type of things. I have one acquaintance where, the key was under a mat or in a box with a security code. They often never saw their guests, so they have 2 per room on paper and end up with 16 people and 3 pit bulls.
So
Yeah.
that's why there's an unhosted
Okay.
rental requirement in here.
Yeah.
And that's where I was trying to get at also. And I am speaking to this from experience from a house that's several houses down from me, that they were having wild parties several days in a row, several weeks in a row, and then they disappeared, and all of a sudden they come back, and we got it quelched, but that's where I was headed with this. So thank you.
Well, under the auspices of the permit, when the owner rents it, I mean, all of these regulations are, in the agreement that the guest signs. So the guest is responsible for their behavior.
Well,
From
that's
that-
supposed to be responsible.
Yes, right, but and according to this draft, the guest would be, the fined and probably responsible for any damages.
So the other thing too, just real quick, is that you have the people that have their permits that this applies to, but then we have the ones that we're always chasing, that are doing things without proper permitting, inspections and all the stuff that's in here. And staff, we actually have a third party that Chris works with because it's an ongoing issue in the city. And it is a zoning violation, but it is a long process to go through a zoning violation. This allows us to use this process for those people as well. And, it's a financial decision for them because some of them are, they're not paying TOT if they're not permitted. They're doing a lot of things. So if you don't have some kind of teeth in here, they're playing the odds. So I think it's important.
And so to our esteemed city administrator, since I didn't notice any other fining or enforcement mechanism, is this being applied to the non-permitted? Okay.
Yes, so any violation of this chapter, a requirement of this chapter requires that you have a permit.
Right.
If you don't have a
That's-
permit and we have
And be paying the TOT.
Yep. And so if we use a third-party vendor that regularly checks and monitors who is operating without any type of permit, so this part of this ordinance would allow us to provide for an administrative penalty for those that engage in short-term rental without proper permitting from the city. And again, we use a third-party contractor to do that. So we don't have enforcement officers going out on the city streets.
Right.
It's through, and most cities and jurisdictions use these type of software-based third-party contractors to regularly check all the different short-term rental sites and to compare that to the permitting list that the city has.
Okay, while you're sort of paying attention to me again, the cutoff date was May 6th? Did I get my M's mixed up? I went through it and I didn't quite catch it,
So are you referring to the moratorium of
Yes,
when they could
exactly.
apply? It was March 16th.
March,
It was approved unanimously by the city council.
thank you.
So, but the exemption period or the amnesty period for those current active permit holders, and I believe there's just under 36 because we're trying to weed through the ones that were closed permanently versus the ones that were closed due to COVID. So we are trying to get permit holders that have an inactive permit to be the ability to come into compliance, because we want to make sure that those that were closed due to COVID has the ability to renew. So we are giving the grace period until July 1st, 2021. So those that have been closed this last year due to COVID, they'll have the ability to come into renewal. That's not for new permit holders. Right. Those are the only ones that had closed down and did not renew.
Oh, actually, you reminded me of something unless somebody else wants to take the floor for a bit, I did have one other comment.
Go ahead. Okay,
And that was on 1 and 2 of the first page here, which I'm trying to find. I think it would be useful to put new permits, even though it shows the exemption towards the end of the document.
I would disagree with that, council member.
And why is that?
Because this would be a requirement for all permits, even current permit holders. So they are just given an amnesty period or an exemption, but it's not just for new, it's for all those that have a permit process. And then you would have to define new. What does new look like? And so that's an amendment. That's more or less what an amendment stands for, is we're amending this chapter. So it would go forth since the amendment was put into play. And then it has that exemption and amnesty period for those that are current. But, and I don't know if the city attorney, Mr. Miller, if he wants to speak up, but it's my recommendation that we do not add the words new, because it is still a requirement of the current permit holders.
Okay.
Yes, correct. Agreed.
You're referring to number 1, primary residence on page 11 there?
I don't know what page you're talking about.
Okay, and that's why I finally found it.
On the memo.
Oh, you're talking about the memo, not the drafted ordinance itself.
Okay, yes. So the memo doesn't mean anything then?
I'm sorry, which part of the memo are you looking
Well,
at?
the primary residence limit new short-term rentals to primary residences.
So again, I don't want to
just-
qualify it as new, because the requirement is for
Okay.
everybody. We're just exempting
Current. Okay. Thank you. Oh, I can breathe again.
Thank you. Anyone else before we go to public comment? Okay, so I'd like to open this up for public comment. Hit the raise your hand feature or *9.
If you're on a phone line.
Yes, if you're on a phone line.
So your first public comment is from Keenan Whitman.
Hey, good evening, council and staff. Keenan Whitman. I was calling to just see if we could consider allowing properties zoned commercial to operate without the owner having to live on it for new applicants in the future. And the main difference is commercial properties tend to be valued by the income approach, whereas residential homes tend to be valued by the sales comparison approach. And so, oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, all right. And so that was just my comment, that you would, it seems like it would be a good fit for all the downtown businesses to kind of keep the tourists close to the downtown corridor. Kind of fits well with Vision Sonora. And it really wouldn't affect the character of neighborhood homes because they're in commercially zoned parcels. So that was my only comment. I did want to commend staff and everyone for working on this. And I am thankful for the kind of aligning the dates of the business licenses and the transient use permits. So thank you. That's my only comment.
Thank you.
Your next public comment is from Kathy's iPhone.
Kathy's iPhone. Kathy's iPhone, feel free to unmute.
If you would hit, if you're on a phone line, if you could hit dial *6 to unmute yourself, or if you, or for chance online, just hit the unmute.
Mute. Okay then.
Are you there?
Yes, we're here.
Oh, thank you. Sorry about that. I obviously am not Kathy. I'm Matt Zielinski. And Mr. Mayor and council members, thank you for taking my call. I have spoke numerous times on this issue in the past, and I just want to reiterate a few more things of my situation. It appears that you guys refuse to accept the fact that these regulations on Airbnbs is not going to solve your growing homeless and low-income housing problem. These are moratoriums that are going to stop tourists from coming into your city. That's what it's going to do. Anyhow, the only thing, it sounds like you guys are going to go forward with this regardless. The only thing that I can hope for is to reiterate that there should be an exception for people who have started this process before any of these discussions came up. And in my situation, it was back in November, 4 or 5 months before this was even talked about with my investment. And I know there's probably others out there that did the same thing. It's not easy to put together an Airbnb, especially to make it, nice and beautiful for the city and comfortable for the guests. It takes time if you want to do it right, and we do things right. And that is why we didn't do the permit process until we were finished with a few more items. Unfortunately, we got caught up in the middle of all of these regulations, and it's really kind of putting a damper on probably mine and several other people's situations. I think it needs to be taken into exception rather than just cut a hard line rule of March 15th or whatever your deadline was if you didn't have a permit in place. I invite all of you to meet with me, and I will show you my Airbnb, where it's located, give you the tour, and answer any questions that you might have or any concerns that you don't think that this would be great for the city of Sonora and the businesses in town and tourism by itself. I will email you my contact information, and hopefully you guys can get back a hold of me, and I will show you what a beautiful Airbnb close to town looks like. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matt.
So at this time, again, if you have any public comment, please raise your hand using the raise your hand feature, or *9 if you are on a phone line.
Doesn't look like we have anybody else.
I don't see any additional public comment, council members.
Okay, so we'll bring it back to the council for more direction to city staff. Who would like to start? Mr. Palmer.
Well, Councilwoman Sutch also raised her hand, so why don't we start with her, and after that, I would like a moment or two.
I'll be fast. I'm still struggling a little bit with the accessory dwelling unit limitation. So I'm curious if we know when
I couldn't quite hear you. The excessive dwelling?
No, accessory dwelling unit.
Oh, okay.
When will the state regs, the new state code come out? Do we have any idea?
I believe it's 2025 when that one goes.
Oh, I thought it was going to be like.
It's not imminent.
There's some changes coming. The ADU stuff is very convoluted, to say at best. In fact, we had a question for Nubia because somebody was looking at doing one. She actually had to call HCD because she couldn't answer it based on what's in the code. So it is very convoluted. So like I said, as part of our ordinance updates, we'll be delving into it. We're going to have to get the city attorney involved as well as we draft that. There is a conflict in there. It says it shall and may, that it can be regulated. But also we'll be looking at, because we look at that as our way to get our RHNA numbers, which is our housing required numbers. And we'll be looking, we might actually recommend that even if the state doesn't, that we would say ADUs, accessory dwelling units, should be for long-term rental because it provides housing. So, but you could look at, if you want to look at an option, you could look at depending if it has to be changed later, based on what we find out when we're working on our ADU, you could say that as long as it's within the dwelling or something. Again, so that you have some controls, so they're not right on the property lines or in multiple locations on the property. But a junior ADU, at least it's within the body of the structure, so it can't, it's not as close, is not as close as most of them would be to the property line. So.
Well, I did read the code that was referenced in the packet, and why I'm concerned about it is that I think, I'm not an Airbnb person. I have rental property and I don't convert them to Airbnbs when I could have, because I like providing a home for someone. But I would consider building an ADU on my property, I would never consider renting it long-term, but for extra, for space, or my husband and I don't have children, so for a place for someone to live who could take care of us. But, so it would be helpful if we could use it as a short-term rental to help pay for that. And it would never be part of the housing stock, ever. I wouldn't ever rent, it wouldn't be part of the housing stock. So, I just think there are reasons to allow ADUs, not on the property line and not even 1,200 square feet. I mean, a small structure that isn't attached to the primary residence.
Right, and that is your guys' call until the state tells us otherwise. But I would keep in mind, I think there's some things down the road we're going to be looking at, and we're just going to need to figure out how complex we want to make everything. That's why we tried to simplify it by saying junior ADU, yes, and didn't include accessory dwelling units.
I also think it should require off-street parking. I mean, I think that because I have some concerns with off-street park, how this is written with our off-street parking. Because, if you don't limit off-street parking to the number of bedrooms, then I think you can have you can have like a big parking problem out on the street. So anyhow, I just was curious.
Yeah, it's really hard, like in our downtown, because for your existing ones, there's no way they can create parking.
I understand
So,
existing.
yeah, that's
ones. It's
kind of
just
the big
current,
deal.
future ones. Okay, thank you.
Sorry, I wish I had a better answer for you.
No, it's not your
And
fault.
I wish it was already done, but we've been a little busy.
Well, and then also the conflict within the state code right now is really
Yeah.
hindering our ability to give a sound recommendation
Right.
because there's a conflict between
Yeah.
the two.
We had the whole conversation the other day, and the same thing was it's conflicting.
Yeah, okay, thanks so much.
You think that's worthy of talking over? See, I can see both sides of it. The reason we're taking this up, of course, is that we're trying to help a little bit more with housing stock. And yet, for most people, perhaps, if they're in the residence and it's just close to attached, I mean, maybe you could put a little walkway across to covered walkway, and then it would be attached enough you could do it. I don't know, but I think that is actually well within what we were thinking of originally, having new Airbnbs have an owner occupied main dwelling. So, I mean, I can go either way on that, but if you want to discuss it more, now's the time, because the farther we get along, the harder it will be to change anything.
It's hard without the state regs. I mean, I thought they were coming up.
And in that case, see, I'm confident trusting staff's decision-making,
Well, I'm all for protecting housing stock. It's just that I think that there can be an argument made that there are many ADUs that would never be part of the housing stock. And so it's actually a personal thing. So
right. Well, and that's why, one of the reasons why sometimes, I mean, I mentioned my garage, because it makes for a clear example that we can actually talk about instead of some of the amorphous policy positions. but it's harder. So if I can take the floor, if you're done,
I'm done. Thank
I
you.
will. Okay. So one of the reasons I checked with the cutoff date is I think, let me just take a step back. People are going to get hurt in this decision, irrespective of how we do it. And I think that the council should extend a little farther out for those that, like Matt Zielinski, have been building. They invested hundreds of thousands, maybe more. And if we're looking at the market out there, millions of dollars in an economic world that we are sort of arbitrarily changing with a very arbitrary date. And to have a closing point is important, and I think it was well-intentioned, but that we need a little bit more leeway because a lot of people just weren't involved with this until it was well underway. And that's why, if it had been May 6th, I would have said, okay, people have had lots of time. But I think that as a council, we ought to talk about extending that moratorium date a little bit.
I agree. I was going to bring that up, but you beat me to it, daggone it.
That's right.
I've talked to Matt Zielinski. I've talked to Cindy and Steve Zielinski. They know the business pretty well. I don't want to see anyone lose their investment. So I'd be willing to take a look at that more. But then also, Cannon Whitman, I don't know if he's still on there, but he brought up something I found interesting. And you forget, living downtown, many houses that people are living in are on commercial property. And
Yeah.
I can see an exemption to that. I'm more for this if we have, those two exemptions. Rochelle and Mary Rose, I'm not sure who.
So your downtown is a lot of your low income apartments downtown, and that's commercially zoned.
That's true.
So we've talked about that extensively as well, because we thought of looking at it from developing a tourist sector. However, again, if we're looking at it to prevent loss of housing stock, that's your low income and affordable housing units are in your downtown commercially zoned area.
It's a tough situation because we get it. I mean, because it
I'm
brings the tourists to
downtown.
the downtown. But you do have those units above that, people live, and a lot of people like to live now. The younger generation especially, they love to live in those in the lofts of downtown. And so you do lose your housing stock in your downtown. People can walk to everything they need downtown. People, they don't need vehicles downtown. It's just, everything's here for them. So it does make it hard. The single family homes you talked about in the commercial, you don't need to exempt them because they would be able to have a junior ADU in there, and they'd also be able to rent out rooms. You wouldn't have to change that because they live there.
Yep.
Because as long as they can meet the residence requirement, then they can do it.
Okay. I will give several compliments in here. I really like the fire safety requirement and the garbage. No one ever thinks about garbage, and studying this issue in other jurisdictions. I mean, there's a lot of places where the garbage is literally piled up for weeks, and that's one of the big complaints. No one ever talks about it. So a good job there. And then having a local contact person, again, great job.
So anybody else interested in talking about extending the moratorium, your dead date? Because right now we have two people and who have,
So could
that
I?
we know of,
So,
that
yeah,
I know of, and that's why, no, I'm Matt and me, two people.
Right.
So
I'm
could
not talking
I just
about- I'm not
remind the
talking about-
council, we still have accepted applications
Right.
passed, we just did not process.
Right.
So we did know of people that had called that were in the process of purchasing homes, and once they heard there was a moratorium, they did not purchase homes. So you would really have to qualify how exactly, if you're going, a moratorium is a moratorium. If you're going to extend it, how are you going to qualify that?
And did Mr. Zielinski
I'm not speaking specifically to him. He's one case, but he's exemplary for probably half a dozen of the late applications. And it's just that when, I mean, we're looking at spending a lot of money to improve economic development. These are people who have been doing so. They've been improving our local economy and in one of the best ways for city revenues. And they were doing that in what seemed like a predictable world. And the unpredictability of, I mean, it would be normal to wait until you were at least close to finishing before pulling a license and contemplating paying TOT because you don't have any revenues, just expenses. So I'm all on board with going forward with this to try and slowly expand our housing stock. But the thing is, by making it March 6th or June 21st or something in between, it's not going to open up a great difference of housing for those people looking for rentals.
They're still accepting the permits, the applications for
Well,
permits.
and so I would like at this point I mean, if you say, no, we're not on board with that, then I think we ought to make that decision. But I think we should talk about lengthening this moratorium. Well, it's the moratorium on being able to do it. I mean, not just that we haven't processed anything for this year, but this would be going forward. So if we say, or at least my understanding, please correct me if I'm wrong, if we say March 6th is 16? Oh, okay, I keep on hearing 6. I'm sorry for my hearing. You probably are familiar with that.
Yes, I am.
So March 16, and if we don't change sometime early in this process, that's what it will be. And we will have, to my mind, sort of unthinkingly damaged, maybe to hundreds of thousands of dollars, several of our residents or at least business people. And I think now's the time to talk about it.
So if I may, council member,
Yes.
if I can just remind the council of why the moratorium was done on March 16th. So at the time in which the council directed staff to bring back an ordinance on March 15th, we saw a run between March 15th or March 16th actually, and April 5th when we asked for the moratorium. And at the time we saw, gosh, Chris, do you remember? It was 9 applications. It was a fair amount of applications, and the majority were not primary residency Airbnbs. And we were receiving dozens of phone calls within that time frame of people wanting to purchase homes in this area as a second home to flip to Airbnb. And that was discussed during that April 5th meeting. Hence the moratorium from March 6th, or March 16th, excuse me. So what was approved was a moratorium to suspend and not process. We have still received applications. We have not processed those applications based on that moratorium, but I will tell you, we have not received any additional applications past since that moratorium was put into play.
So it would be not, I mean, it would be fair to everybody in the market to say when the date of the moratorium, which was, you said?
April 5th.
April 5th. So that if we said going forward, we will not process any, but when this is approved, we will process up to that April 5th meeting, would pretty well be fair.
We have to bring back another item to redo the moratorium.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear what you said.
So we have to bring back another item to address that. But again, I just want to remind the council the majority of those applications were for second home.
Okay, well,
Airbnbs.
And I mean, this is going to be imperfect any way we do it. It's just that it's really important for me to try and create an environment where our business people and people thinking of trying to make money in the city feel that they can trust the city council to create an environment that's predictable enough that when they invest $500,000 in something, that they can actually expect to go forward with it. Because that predictability is businesses can tolerate really horrible conditions, but they have a tough time with unpredictability.
And I think moving the goalpost
Well,
is adding to that unpredictability.
Okay, so we just say you said total of 9 or 16. I'm not sure how many came in.
I'd have to go back and look at the item that was presented to the council at the time.
And this is why I'm looking, if I don't have any support from the council on this, then I will quit yammering on it. But this is the time this is the best time for us to deal with it before this is enacted into almost there. And then you get Mark saying, no, that's just too unfair to too many people. I'm against it. I want to be for it. I think this is a good direction to be going. But we really have to be fair to our business people who have invested millions. So I'm done. Sorry.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Councilmember Such.
So I'm sorry, I'm confused. The people who applied after, the rush of people applying had already purchased the buildings. Is that not correct? They had already invested in the buildings.
I'm not sure. I'm not entirely sure. I do know that the majority of the applications received within that time frame was from one particular business. And then we had, and I can pull up the agenda item for you. Hold on just a moment.
You wouldn't apply for a permit if you didn't have the building, would you, sir? I don't know.
One would think. Hold on, let me pull up the item so I'm giving you the correct information and not thinking off the top of my head. Wait.
You're gonna get in trouble.
Okay, so in the agenda item, it said there were 36 permitted. We couldn't identify any long-term available rentals. The community development department has received, okay, so this was on April 5th. And so that was 2 weeks after the direction from the council on March 15th. So we had received 6 applications for transient use permits, 7 phone calls concerning use. So those are in addition to 7 phone calls concerning transient use permit applications. From the 6 applications received, 3 applications were from a business owner that resides within Tuolumne County and currently has 6 short-term rental units in the city of Sonora. 1 application was submitted from a resident of Castro Valley, and 1 application was submitted from a resident of Copperopolis, and 1 application was received from a local resident who currently resides at the property.
An important question then is, if we don't deal with this now, is there a future date where we can readdress it? Because see, I'm willing to say, I could learn more, who, what, when, and maybe I'd change my mind. But I would go back in the absence of further study and knowledge, and I've been looking into this a little bit, but I'm willing to put it off, but if it has to be done now or this is the way it is, then I would sure like to address it now. So is this the dead date as far as making our ordinance?
So again, this is a draft. The
Yeah.
draft will then go to the planning commission.
Yeah,
Any changes you make after the planning commission recommendation would then
goes back.
require to go back to the planning
Right,
commission.
exactly. So this really is, that's why I was hoping that we could wait till people could come in. But it seems to me that this is something that we need to either address or say, Mark, forget it. That was just an overreach.
So any recommendation by the planning commission, that would be a change, that they make a change would come back to us as changed, or just a recommendation to come to us?
Just a
with-
recommendation, part of the ordinance, the draft ordinance.
So I just wanted to support what Mary Rose was saying. I have no dog in this
Right,
fight because
no.
I get what you guys are saying.
I don't
But I
either.
can't promise you that we haven't told people on the phone there's a moratorium. And because
that's
of
my
that,
concern.
they did not apply.
They didn't apply or
So-
purchase a property or.
Yeah, they
and that's
didn't
my
move, or
concern.
yeah, so it's a fairness thing. I don't know if there's a good answer, but I'm just telling you from a staff's perspective, from all of us that answer phones, including, Darlene gets calls, Jody gets calls, or got calls. I can't tell you that people were told, oh, go ahead and apply. I mean, if they asked if there was a moratorium, we would say, yeah, there is a moratorium and they're working on a draft.
But
So
yeah, my concern
it's
is
a
for
fairness
those.
thing. I don't know what the right answer is, but I just want to be honest with you
This
guys.
is never going to be perfect.
I, as an administrator,
Yes, and I
my
respect.
recommendation is I'm very concerned that we're changing the date past the moratorium for
Moving the
those
goal.
that we told there is a moratorium and they didn't purchase property or they didn't invest. And then there could be resentment from that aspect.
Well,
It's kind of
So-
moving the goalpost type of thing. That's the,
okay, there was a 2-week period, well, it might have been 2.5 or 3 weeks between the, what was it, the March 15 then and the starting date of the moratorium at, no, you said March 16, so it's right the day after. And the first one was in February. So I don't know. I often miss a lot of stuff if I'm engaged in a project and just trying to improve a house, for example. And until it became a big issue and people started pulling their hair out and screaming at us, I think a lot of people may well have missed that first issue. Anyhow, looks like Councilwoman Such is thinking hard and wanting to say something.
Well, I just have an addenda about rentals. My neighbor rented a very, very small studio on Jackson. She had 70 applications for, one about the size of the desk. And I mean, I think we really are looking at a critical housing shortage. And I have every sympathy. I mean, we've all missed deadlines. We've all had to pay the IRS. We've all, I totally understand. And I know the property on Lion Street, it is a significant property. But I don't know that, as you said, is there a perfect answer for all of these situations? And if you can come up with it, Mark, more power to you.
Well, like I say, nothing's going to be perfect and maybe not even horribly close, but we do need to do everything we can to protect the business environment that we project as a city. And that's, we're going to be spending money on economic development to try and persuade people that this is a good place to do business. And one of the ways to do that is to, as best possible, carry out a predictable investment environment.
Anyone else? Oh, Councilmember Such.
I'm struggling with this because there is an issue of fairness. But it seems to me if someone had already purchased property and was converting it to an Airbnb when we set in this moratorium, they have made a significant investment, and then we changed the rules. And I think that that is less fair than the person who didn't buy property because they were told there was a moratorium.
That's the perspective I'm looking at it from.
And I am very anti-Airbnb because I think that phenomena has it's not the only problem, but it has contributed to the lack of housing stock. But I just think as a property owner myself, if I had bought property and we were converting it to an Airbnb because we were allowed to do that at that time, and then the council imposed a moratorium, I would be very unhappy.
But you wouldn't have taken out the business licenses or
No.
done anything until it was completed and ready to work. That's how I feel about it. And
I mean, I do feel like there's one small subgroup here that we should probably protect. That's what I think. And I can't, and I hate that I'm listening to myself say that, but that's what I think is the most
You need a
fair.
grandfather clause. A specific grandfather.
Talk me out of it, Rochelle.
So I'm going to be devil's advocate for a minute because I just had a phone call from a lady the other day that's from Southern California that bought 2 buildings. And I know what she's going to tell us. She's going to tell us she bought it with the anticipation that she was going to be able to do an Airbnb. I know she is. I'm not calling out a name or telling you who it is, but I know she will because she is, after she bought it, after the fact, said, where do you think that's going to go? And we told her what the direction was heading. And I think she will come back and say, well, that was my intent. That's why I bought those commercial buildings. Sorry. I mean, I really think that's where it's going to go. So you're going to have, I think it's going to be very difficult. I think you're in a tough spot. The few applications that came in, maybe, but I'm not even sure the person you're talking about even applied yet. So, it's a tough spot. There's no good answer, but I can guarantee a lot of people will say, well, that was my intent.
Yeah, and that's my concern. How do you define that? How would you even go and check on that? Because the amount of phone calls we got from people saying, well, I was going to purchase, and how would, well, but even if somebody purchased and then they were told there was a moratorium, and then they come back and say, well, that was my intent. I mean, how do we verify that? How does city staff, we have to, from a city staff perspective, how would we be able to verify that?
We're going to have people who take advantage of the system. That's what happens with laws. Every law someone is taking advantage of, no matter what. I don't want to see anyone lose their investment. I understand there's people out there that are they're going to try to take advantage of the system where it would be unfair to somebody else. But I've talked to several people, not a whole lot, but I've talked to several people that invested a lot of money. Probably should have applied sooner, but that was their original intention.
Why on God's sweet earth would anybody apply before it's finished in a normal world? I mean, I can't think of a good reason why I would do that unless you knew that something's coming down the road and they're going to cut my knees off. That's so, I mean, when I look at it, how I would, have reacted. Now, I think after whatever the second date was, the April 5th, if somebody hasn't been aware of it by then, okay, life's tough. We really have done everything and we're still taking applications. We told people we're still taking applications, we're just not going to process them. And so, I mean, their ignorance is the fault of the non-applicant, as it were. But it's not going to be perfect. We're going to have some of these businesses that did apply and got in. Unfortunately, I mean, and that's not who I want to be serving. I want to serve the little people who have invested $500,000 in a home that they're turning into something that's a lot nicer. And I've got no dog in this fight. It's pure principle. It's just for business people, we have to give them as predictable an environment as we can. So maybe we could ask our attorney what the ramifications are. That smile has me scared. So what the
I would expect there would be some liability if someone
well, and that's
wasn't.
I want to hear
Thought that
this
there was
before
going to not be an opportunity, and suddenly there is.
Yep. So maybe our attorney could speak to this since he's better informed on it than any of us.
Sure. I would say the way, excuse me, the way this is set up, the idea is provided if there's sufficient notice to each of the applicants, then this ordinance, I don't think the city faces any liability for that. This is something we can look into further. But I can say, as the ordinance is there now, and given these time periods and deadlines that have been put forth, there's minimal liability at this point. These applicants have been put on notice. Perhaps it doesn't extend to far back to the degree that you're contemplating. But there has been, and even as part of this process where we're discussing this, all of these meetings, they've been given sufficient notice. The Planning Commission is going to have a public hearing. I think the council is being very careful and taking the right actions here, such that there's really very low risk of liability.
Well,
okay. Did that answer our question?
I don't think it did, actually, to be honest with you.
I
I think we're not asking about the ordinance itself. We're asking about if we move the moratorium, the liability that we would have by people who didn't continue on and put in permits that they knew that we're not, we had a system where people were putting in permits anyway. We weren't going to process them, but other people were kind of told that we had a moratorium, and those people there would be a liability to those people that they did not invest or they did not pursue it because they thought that they were going to be out of they did it after the date of the moratorium.
Right.
Someone can explain that better than me, please.
Okay. Yeah. Don't have an instant answer to that off the top of my head. I can say, now the moratorium date we're talking about is the July 1st, 2021 date. Is that correct, Mary?
No, absolutely not. It's the March 16th, 2020. So there was direction given on March 15th. The city started to receive multiple applications. So on April 5th, the council approved a moratorium for applications to process as of March 16th, 2021, to allow us to be able to not approve applications that were in conflict with what the direction of the draft ordinance was going to be from the council, and to be not have a run on applications.
Okay. Okay.
So
and sorry, go ahead.
Maybe I can try and sum up the question then. So is the city likely to be liable for actions not taken by market participants who believed because the moratorium was then in place and fixed that they did not go ahead and buy something? Or Is that pretty clear? I mean, you think that's
Yeah,
what?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So they did that in reliance upon the instruction they were given, the direction on March 15th, right?
Yes.
Okay. And they did not take action.
And subsequent by city staff when they would phone up and say, I'd like to do this. Well, we have a moratorium on the applications, on processing the applications. Is that correct, Mary Rose? That would be the response by the city?
Yes.
Okay.
And then I will just say from a staff perspective, it was also enforced on May 3rd, because I believe Mayor Pro Tem Plummer, you asked about the extension of the moratorium, and that was not approved by direction by the council. So again, we had been telling the public that we weren't changing that date.
Okay. Okay. Well, as far as the March 15th moratorium, again, I think there's, if at that point, these applicants had not submitted their applications yet, and that's who we're talking about, correct?
Yes.
Okay, I thought we were talking about subsequent to that for the following, what, 4 or 5 weeks?
Okay, okay. So applicants who were planning to submit their application, but because of the moratorium, they did not. Okay. Well, you know, the city can, you know, from a liability perspective, the city can take actions as it will. In this case, the moratorium that was directed by council, the city itself faces no liability for that. To the extent that someone would, or an applicant would potentially contest the moratorium, well, no, I think you're good. I think the moratorium.
Contest
Yes.
moving the moratorium.
To April 5, for example.
Yeah.
And then they were not allowed, they didn't participate because they thought the moratorium was going to stick. And
Right.
What's our
now
liability?
Because
right.
as of right now, we only received 6 applications between the March 16th date and the April 5th date. And
Okay.
3 of which were submitted by one particular applicant.
Okay. Okay.
So our Councilmember or Mayor Pro Tem Plummer, are you looking at just extending it from a direction? So we can move from a direction standpoint. Are you looking at it from extending the applications up to the April 5th date?
Yes. And a hard deadline, nothing after that, except for private residences that we contemplate being changed going forward.
So we would have to rewrite the ordinance, because as of right now, it says those permit holders in good standing, they have not been granted any permit.
And
So
at that juncture, this isn't very difficult because this is a draft. I was reminded repeatedly. So that's not going to cut it for this. Yeah, that's what I'm contemplating asking the council to, that's what I'm asking the council to contemplate.
Okay. From a legal I'm sorry.
So now you understand the legal question, where by moving it, are we putting the city in jeopardy for actions not taken by potential investors? And that's where I would think the law is pretty lenient for things not taken.
Mm-hmm.
But you're the counselor, and your opinion carries a lot more weight.
If the city would like to extend the moratorium from March 15th to April 5th, I think there would be no problem with that from a legal perspective. And I think if council wants to take that direction, we can, and I'll defer to Mary Rose on this, but I think that you can amend the draft to reflect that.
So I'm looking for direction, for majority direction. Does the council want to move to allow for the 6 applications received? So we only received 6 applications. So I want to be clear, this would not be for any people that did not apply between March 16th and April 5th. So that moratorium would be to allow for those 6 applications, which I just read, which was the, but then I can't, Rochelle, I can't remember, have we received anything past April 5th?
Well, that.
See, I don't know.
And that at this juncture, to me, that is enough time.
So,
But-
well, I'll state my thoughts and I don't know, to me, you set a moratorium, I understand there's issues, we're gonna have issues, what's fair, what's not fair. But if you're gonna set the moratorium and then you start moving the date, then that's gonna be even more unfair, it seems to me. You're moving the goalpost after the fact. And I don't know, I just think we ought to stick to the moratorium, stick to the date. That's pretty much, I understand all the ramifications, I get it.
I'm not going to try and persuade you. I respect your opinion here. But one of my feelings about that, this was a line in the sand so we can start a process. But to my way of thinking, when we were talking about this isn't the end of the world deadline. This is a line in the sand so that we can start reviewing this and finding a direction we want to go. That's why, to me, it's not a hard deadline. This is the end of the world for you if you missed the news.
So looking for direction on that, because I don't know whether we received any additional applications beyond the April 5th, and I don't know what the council wants as their purview beyond that.
Well, it's up to the other 3. I think
I've talked way too much.
Mark's and mine is a pretty well set. So it's kind of up to
Okay, yeah, and you move it to April 5th. And the particular business person that you seem to be most concerned about, I mean, it wouldn't benefit him whatsoever. So I'm not quite sure what the point is.
I don't know to whom you're referring because I'm not thinking of any specific. I don't know to whom you're referring because I'm not thinking of a specific
Okay,
individual.
all right,
I'm not
well,
referring to
it
Mr.
would
Zelinski and if.
It would benefit the 6.
Okay,
All
and
right. And you're good with that?
it's not my preferred outcome, but I think it's the best, fairest thing to do for our business environment. And see, I have no idea about Mr. Zelinski's, application status or not. If it isn't in by now, then it's not that it was unaware. I mean, that it came out of the blue. So, we do need to make some decisions.
Yeah.
And I'm not, like I said, I have no dog in this fight.
I'm ditto. So I'm with you. I just don't want to see anybody lose their investments. So we are a pro-business city, so I don't want to see anybody lose their investments. So.
We would like to extend it to a hard deadline, dead at April 5.
I see that as reasonable.
So any application received by April 5th?
Yes.
That did, yeah. So
If
then my
they
other
didn't-
question is about people that called. But if that's what they want, just April 5th, I mean. Okay.
Did people call up?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay,
Well,
so
many people called to know whether or not what the council, when the moratorium hit. And we told them and subsequently did not submit
right,
applications.
Do we have documentation of who those people are?
No.
Would we be liable? Well, of course, there'd be no way to check that who they.
So the direction I'm hearing from council is to allow for the 6 additional permits received up until April 5th to be part of the exemption part of the ordinance, which would exempt them from a primary residency requirement.
Well, I heard 2. I don't know about.
Ladies, choose.
What do we, I abstain from this. I think it's like overthinking it.
I think it's overthinking.
Yes. I think we've driven it into the
on you.
ground and pounded it thoroughly. I was okay with the draft as it was.
So then you're for leaving it as it is what you're saying,
Yes.
basically saying.
Yeah, yeah, okay. I'm for leaving it as it is.
I actually am also for leaving it as it is. With a heavy heart.
So I just want to make sure Councilmember Garaventa is stating his direction is to leave as is. Councilmember Sagerstrom is to leave as is. Councilmember Such is to leave as is. Is there anything else that would like to be changed before staff directs it to the Planning Commission? Because of public hearing process, I want to make sure we get all that in there before we start noticing and so forth. We had talked about the low income apartments in downtown area in the commercial zone. Is there a direction on that? Nope.
To protect those. Yes, I would
Okay.
like those protected.
So to not include the commercial area as part of
Exactly.
part of this ordinance.
Well, that's my choice.
Not include, you say? So that would exempt them and they continue to have short-term rentals.
No.
Yeah, see that.
Not include part.
To not include them as an exemption to the ordinance.
Unless they already exist.
Unless they already exist. Correct. Yes. Councilmember Garaventa?
Yeah.
Councilmember Sagerstrom?
I'm good to go.
Okay. All right, so at this point, I've received my direction.
Cool.
So again, just for the public, I just want to say, Mayor Hawkins, just for the public,
Yeah.
this will be going forth to the Planning Commission for a public hearing on July 12th. And the proper notification of that public hearing will be done. Again, this was not an action item. This was merely just to present a draft for direction.
So
We were just chatting.
So a comment that I made earlier while we're still on this, before we get off of this particular and move on to new business, I had made a comment about partying and that sort of thing, and knowing of one of the property owners. One of the property owners, I want to make it very clear, I was not referring to their short-term rentals, but long-term rentals. And I will be more than happy to publicly show if I need to show this if I need to. I am more than happy to do it. But again, I wasn't referring to short-term rentals. It was one of their long-term rentals. So just want to make that clear. It'll probably get convoluted somehow, but anyway, just want to make that very clear. Thank you. Under new business, item number 4, approve resolution 621-2021C, authorizing temporary no parking zones along certain city streets during the 2021 Motherlode Fair. Mary Rose.
This item is actually coming before you from your police chief, so allow him to direct the council.
Mr. Mayor, Honorable Council, to the Police Department request authorization through resolution to establish temporary no parking zones along certain city streets during the 2021 Motherlode Fair. So happens every year, save last year. We had to skip it, but each year the Motherlode Fair brings in a great deal of additional foot and vehicular traffic to the area surrounding the fairgrounds. Certain city streets have been identified with significant choke points over the years. And so by resolution, we request to put up temporary no parking signs in certain areas around the fairgrounds for the entirety of the fair operation. So this year, it's July 1st, which is Thursday, through July 4th, which is Sunday. And we would ask that the signage be authorized for areas of southeast corner of Stockton Road and Southgate, which is where the locomotive is. The east side of Selinsky Street, which is between Stockton Road and West Jackson Street. Fairview Lane, which would include the driveway to the Tolman County Superintendent of Schools, and the east and west portion of Forest Road between Stockton Road and the entrance to the Adventist Health Services there.
Solinsky go up by Tweedy's?
Correct, towards the drop-in center.
Mhm.
So from basically McCoy Tires to the drop-in center in that little area there, it gets pretty narrow. Yeah.
Thank you.
So with this resolution, it would allow us to place the sign. We'd place them in advance. I believe the 48 hours well in advance to notice potential vehicles, drivers, and anyone in that area would be cited for no parking based on the temporary no parking zone established through resolution. Any questions of me?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Any council member discussion? Okay, so we will look for any public comment or questions.
If you have any public comment on this item, please raise your hand using the raise your hand feature or dial *9 if you're on a phone line.
Doesn't look like we have any public comment.
I don't see any public comment, council members.
Okay, so we'll bring it back for a motion and a second.
Oh, we've got to discuss this for an hour, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, I don't think so. I move on resolution 06-21-2021-C.
Second.
Okay, motion by Councilmember Garaventa, second by Mayor Pro Tem Plummer. Roll call vote, please.
Mayor Hawkins.
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Plummer.
Aye.
Councilmember Garaventa.
Aye.
Councilmember Sagerstrom.
Aye.
And Councilmember Such.
Aye.
Okay, passes 5-0. And I have been asked if we could take a few minute break. So let's come back at about 7:51. So that'd be an 8-minute break. Does that sound good?
Yes.
Yay. Thank you. Now 7:52, and we were coming back from our okay. It is now 7:52, and we are now coming back from our break. Thank you, everyone, for your patience. So we're on to new business, item number 5, received a draft of the City of Sonora General Fund Reserve Policy and provide possible direction to staff. Mary Rose.
All right, I'm going to share my screen once again so that the public can see the PowerPoint. Hopefully everyone can see that. So the item before you is a draft, another draft asking for direction of the City of Sonora Reserve Policy. This was discussed during your 2021 goal and priority setting. You had listed a a priority of prioritize the use of discretionary funds and create a city reserve policy. That was your priority under your provide stewardship for our financial resources goal. And so the draft policy before you is a policy that both myself and your administrative services director, Chris Gorski, has put together. And I just kind of want to go through a couple of highlights. I know we here refer to reserves here in the city of Sonora as your what is technically called your fund balance. So the city of Sonora does not formally have a reserve right now under your general fund, and we'll kind of go into that right now. Under your general fund, you have what is known as a fund balance. And we kind of talk about it when we go into the budget process about what is sitting as your more or less your quote unquote savings account, or those unused money between your revenues and expenses. So your general fund accounts for all resources except for those that are separate in a separate fund that is necessary for legal or administrative purposes. So even within your general fund, we have things called your special revenue funds that are governmental funds within your general fund that are designated by legislative or city council policy. And then there are other funds that are outside the general fund, such as internal service funds. You have enterprise funds. There are proprietary funds are your internal service funds. And then you also have, those are funds that are specific for specific purposes outside your general fund. And they're generally outside what those primary sources of income. So your primary sources of income for your general fund are your property tax, your sales tax, your building and planning fees, your franchise fees, fees for services, and so forth. Those are your discretionary uses. So those fees come in, they don't have specific discretionary uses, and the city council can then put them into different parts of your budget from a discretionary standpoint. When you have funds outside of the general fund, such as in your proprietary or enterprise, they have to be used for a specific purpose under the government code. So when we talk about a reserve policy, we are looking specifically at your general fund. Again, your general uses of your general fund are your public safety departments, police, fire, public works. We talk about the use when we bring forth the budget. We show that pie graph of the percentage of your general fund that is being utilized for the different departments. Generally, police has anywhere between 40 to 42%. Then your fire is usually next, and public works and so forth. And then your general fund balance has been built up over the years after the recession, of course, as a result of revenues exceeding expenditures. So this is when you have more money coming in than is what is being put out. And so that's primarily, though, due to one-time savings. So when Chris will say to police department, okay, you need to stop spending, or we have, or to any department, we usually have cutoff dates on spending to be able to close the books. Or if we have open positions and we haven't had the ability to fill them in a necessary time, you're going to have savings. So again, your budget is kind of a roadmap. And then that fund balance is what is left over based on that savings throughout the year of expenses or additional revenues and unanticipated revenues that have been received. So if we're seeing an increase in sales tax or an increase in property tax, that's all going to kind of add up into what is in that fund balance. So when we look at a reserve policy, what is a general fund reserve policy? It's a measure of your financial resources available. It's a savings account for the general fund. And as of right now, as we've said, you don't have a formalized reserve. And why is it necessary to create a formalized reserve? Well, because in accordance with the GFOA, the government Financiers Officers Association, which I'm a part of, and the Governmental Accounting Standards Board, your GADSB, for budgeting and expending, they have standards that are set for expending your unassigned fund balance. And when you create a reserve policy, it establishes formal annual revenue levels during the budget process. And the government code actually requires how and when you utilize those formal reserves. So once, and we talked about looking at a contingency, contingencies, and we put that in the budget this year. Contingencies are necessary when you formalize a reserve because there are extreme limitations to how you can utilize those reserves. Reserves can only be utilized and pooled into your general fund or your general ledger in a declared emergency or during the budget process. So we can't just arbitrarily go through the fiscal year and say, oh, we need to buy a new police vehicle, let's pull it from reserves. We can't do that. But from a contingency standpoint, something that's already in the budget, budgeted as contingency, that's utilized for kind of your unexpected expenses. And a reserve policy allows for flexibility to adapt to economic changes, such as unexpected emergencies or downturns in the economy. That's why you have that reserve, and that's why you're allowed to use it during declared emergencies. And it ensures that the city has adequate financial resources to maintain basic municipal services. So it establishes that baseline of how much money that the city wants to ensure that we are saving in that reserve for economic uncertainty or for emergency disaster and so forth. For local government, the need to maintain a healthy general fund reserve has really come to head when we're looking at COVID. We relied on that ability to pull from our informal reserve or our fund balance to be able to balance that budget and get us through the downturn. And when you're looking ahead, we know, we kept saying as we were coming out of the last recession, okay, we're really optimistic, but we know we're going on year 10 of coming out of a recession, and we know a recession is going to hit soon. So you want to make sure that you are planning for the next economic downturn, and a reserve policy does that. So when we look at what are some basic minimums of a reserve policy, the GFOA and GADSB and GAP, they set what those recommendations are. Generally, it's about 2 times your monthly operating expenses. So as of right now, we have just a little over 8 million of your adjusted appropriation. And so we would look at that adjusted appropriation and determine what that reserve level should be. So the recommendation from myself and from Chris Gorski is that we maintain a level of about 25% of your general fund adjusted appropriation for any given budget year. So at budget time, when you're setting your reserve, this is going to be an annual process in which the council will have to take a formal resolution to set that reserve amount. So you're going to look at what that adjusted appropriation is for that fiscal year and ensure that there is that 25% within your reserves, and make an adjustment with that fund balance to either increase or decrease based on those adjusted appropriations. Reserves are generally divided up between 2 things. Generally, you want a major part of your reserves to be for economic uncertainty. And when Chris has to do his CAFR, and when we do our budget, we have to show what that fund balance is assigned to. So generally it'll say economic uncertainty, and we have budgeted this amount. And then we're also recommending to have 25% of your reserve for exposure reserve. So to minimize the impact of potential costs not covered by insurance programs. So we would be able to take that for additionally insurance issues that arise and be able to use it for that. So 75% dedicated for economic uncertainty. Chris and I are seeing extreme increases going forward in insurance. And so we want to make sure that we have budgeted enough resources for those ongoing economic uncertainties as well. And then as an absolute, based on what GADSB establishes, anytime that reserve balance falls below 15% of an adjusted appropriation, which is about 2 months of your adjusted appropriations, there will have to be an actual formal finding that articulates the need for the use of the reserve, and a plan to replenish those reserves within 5 years. So say we're going along and a recession hits, and we need to, as part of the next year's budget, dip into reserves to balance our budget. And we get below that 15% threshold of our adjusted appropriations. And so we would have to make, at time of budget, we would have to make a formal finding for the use of those reserves, of why we're using those reserves. And then we would have to bring back an actual formalized plan on how we are going to replenish those reserves within 5 years to get us back up to that at least 15%, of course, aspiring to the 25%, which we are recommending. So again, you know, sometimes as of right now, we have an adjusted appropriation of just over 8 million, correct, Chris? I believe it's 8.2 or something. And right now sitting in our fund balance could be, well, it depends on the day, right? Depending on where the cash flow is at the moment. That's why you look at it from when the books actually end. But we can be anywhere between 2.8 to 3 million sitting in our fund balance. Well, obviously that is over that 25% needed threshold. So we want to look at, as stewards of the taxpayers' money, and ensuring that we are providing for much needed fleet improvements and capital improvements. We want to be able to identify the use of the excess fund balance above that 25% threshold. So we had a great year, we had some great sales tax, we had some great property tax. What are we going to be able to utilize those excess funds to? Because we don't want to keep just saving and saving and saving. That's not good stewardship of the taxpayers' money. We want to put those, they want to see services, they want to see ensuring that their facilities are improved, they want to see roads being done, and so forth. So we've listed in your reserve policy what those excess fund balance dollars can be used towards. And again, I want to caution the council that they are only one-time money. So you never want to dedicate one-time resources to ongoing expenses, such as personnel costs or any operating expense that could be considered ongoing. So in the reserve policy, we look at anything above that 25% to go towards funding an appropriate contingency level. So we talked about how we're trying to get to that 3% of a contingency in your budget. We want to look, and we've talked a lot about employee pension plan contributions. So looking at your and also your OPEB or your other post-retirement benefits, paying down those unfunded liabilities. So if we have excess fund balance, we want to first use those money towards paying off that unfunded liability. And then also unmet capital projects. Those are one-time expenses that we can use those excess dollars towards improving the facilities, roads, and also fleet, any type of capital fleet, and so forth. And then accrued employee leave as well. And those are things that will reduce liabilities from a city perspective. And then again, they are one-time costs. So again, this is only looking at from an excess fund balance perspective. So again, right now, when we talk about reserves, the city does not have any formalized reserves, and we're asking the city council to actually make a formalized reserve policy so that we can formalize those reserves. It also benefits the city in which, if there's ever a time in which we have to finance a particular project, credit agencies look for reserve policies and look for the fact in which you are setting aside in reserve. So it really does aid us in that. I'm not saying that we're going to ever get to the point we're going to be looking at financing projects, but we always want to think ahead of our credit rating as a city as well. So just in a synopsis, we are recommending that we adopt, again, this is just a draft, but we're recommending that we adhere to the GADSB, which is your Government Accounting Standards Board, and GFOA recommendations at looking at least 25% of your adjusted appropriation to be held in reserve for any given budget year. So you'll have to make that finding every year. And then to separate those reserves, 75% to economic uncertainty, 25% for, sorry, excuse me, I want to go back there, for exposure reserve. And then anytime the reserve falls below that 15%, to make sure that we have articulated findings and a plan to replenish. And then also within that reserve policy, an actual finite where those additional excess monies can be used for, just to ensure that we're not using one-time resources for ongoing expenses, because that's never a good fiscal policy when you're using them for ongoing expenses. So I know it's a lot to absorb. Reserve policies and understanding governmental funds and all of those different elements are quite confusing. We tried to simplify it as best we could and not have all these different kind of elements as part of the reserve policy. This is a very basic reserve policy in our eyes, but because we've never had one, we wanted to make sure we started it out as basic as we could to make sure that it is something that's attainable for the city. And we know that 25% threshold is definitely attainable at this juncture. And so at this time, I will entertain any questions from the council.
I have no questions. I'm very much in support of a more codified system of handling our reserves. So I think it's a great idea. I've always been a little, Tim always made sure we had a good reserve, but I was always leery that there was just this blob of reserve and no real policy that we had to actually use it if we needed it. And I think codifying all this is a real good thing to do.
Yeah, I remember when I first got on the council, 11 years ago now, we didn't have everything set up the way it should, and we were told that Lowe's and McDonald's were going to save the city. And we didn't have the reserves to fall back on like we do now, because again, Tim was, it's a compliment to Tim. Tim was cheap, and it really benefited us this last year big time. So yeah, now that we've got something here, future councils can say, hey, this is it. So Councilmember Sagerstrom.
Well, I did ask Chris what 25% of the funds would be, and it's $2.2 million. And Mary Rose just affirmed that we were in a position to do that. And I agree that it's time to get a reserve policy in motion.
Cool. Anyone else before I ask for public comment?
I have a question that might embarrass me after I ask it, but I understand on the last page, fund appropriate contingency levels and employee pension plan contributions and other post-retirement benefits and unmet capital projects or other needed capital assets. Tell me about accrued employee leave. So
sure.
Is that like when someone leaves so that then you can buy them out, buy all of that accumulated?
So sometimes
accrued leave. Okay.
Yeah, sometimes you have a long-standing employee that leaves the city, and there's going to be a quite large amount of leave to be able to pay that employee once they leave. And
Okay.
again, that's considered a one-time expense. And so that's why that was put in there. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, so for our financial statements, we have to come up with the accrued leave liability. It's a amount that's the total that the city would owe everybody left, basically. And that's as much as $600,000. And so I know that Jen started a reserve for leave, and we just haven't put money back into it. And so with this policy, we would take a piece of the reserve and put that in that fund each budget cycle to plan for the next year.
So not reserve, excess fund balance, right? So
Okay.
we really want to distinguish. So there is, because we're going to formalize the reserve, I know it's kind of getting into the nitty gritty, but reserve are those formal 25%. Anything in addition to would be that excess just fund balance, more or less kind of like your savings account that you could pull from. Yeah.
All right.
So, if I may, Mr. Mayor, my questions don't in any way imply that I'm not all in favor of this. So, not having questions can imply that too, obviously. But where does the 25% number come from? Because The 15%, falling below 15% reserves is a state, what, requirement or suggestion, et cetera.
So
And so one, knowing where or how we come up with 25%, and then what is the maximum of suggested? Is it 35? Or because at some point there's
so the maximum is about 25%.
Okay,
So your
that's
bottom low, as recommended by the GFOA and Gadsby, is about 15 to 16%. Your maximum high is about 25. You don't really want to get into 30% because then again, you're holding on to a specific amount. We actually, as a city, I know it might seem like we have 8 million, might seem like a lot, but it's not a lot comparative to other governments. So when you've got an $8 million budget and you've got $2.83 million sitting in reserve, that's a fair amount of money sitting there, as opposed to like the county that has a $200 million budget and has $2 million in reserve. So you have to think in those kind of perspectives. So we thought 25% was generous compared to the general 15 to 16% that most governments enact, just because of the
nature of this council.
Yes. And
Okay.
Chris probably wants to add something as well.
Just that the GFOA looks at it in how many months of appropriations or expenditures do we have? And as a minimum, they always say 2 months. So you should have 2 months of basically assets or cash available.
Which would be how much?
15%.
15% then, okay, well, okay. Yeah, I wasn't thinking about the math part of it. So in real world terms, then that gives us sort of a 10% cushion against emergencies because we're trying to never get below the 15% and yet stay under the 25%. Is that correct?
So the recommendation from staff is always going to be that we have 25%, and we're going to ask the council to make that finding every fiscal year. What triggers a plan for replenishing and an actual plan of why we're pulling
dropping below the
is
15.
dropping below that 15. But this would set those reserves at that recommended 25%, and then obviously triggering that whole plan when anything that drops below 15.
Okay, thank you. It's not that I don't in any way support this completely. It's just that I want to be a little more knowledgeable about it because almost all of these details are completely outside my ken, and it's nice to know new things. Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, so we shall ask for public comment on this matter. Most of the public's gone, but we'd love to hear from you.
Again, if you have any public comment for this item, please raise your hand using the raise your hand feature or dial *9 if you're on a phone line.
I don't see any hands. Okay, so I will bring it back to the council.
And this is just
Just
direction.
direction, yeah.
Just direction. So this item will come back before the council for formal vote. It's an estimated that second meeting in July for formal vote.
Excellent. Okay, on to new business, item number 6. Consideration to adopt resolution number 6-21-2021A, approving memorandum of understanding for the Sonora Employees Association, SEA, effective July 1st, 2021 through June 30th, 2022, and authorize the mayor to sign the agreement. Mary Rose.
So the item before you is your MOU or Memorandum of Understanding for the Sonora Employees Union, effective July 1st. In your packet, it identifies the following agreed upon terms. And I'm just going to highlight a couple of things. So all classifications within this unit effective July 1st would receive a 1% cost of living adjustment. And then one thing that we have negotiated with this union is the reinstatement of the F-step. And during the recession, it was negotiated with all associations to do away with that F-step to allow for savings of employee costs. because of the recession and the the need for the reduced expenditures. So with this, we're looking ahead and looking to see that we are starting to see a rebound of COVID, and we are starting to see some of those sales tax measures coming back in. So along with the 1%, it is recommended for the reinstatement of the F-step for employees that qualify. There are specific requirements of how employees can receive that F-step, which is that final step within a salary range. And then also back, I believe in 2017 or 18, there was a creation of a community development specialist 1-2 position, but there was no actual salary range associated with the creation of that. So this kind of shores up that. And then your next item is approving that salary range for the community development 1-2. So something that's needed within a small organization like ourselves is the ability for your long-term employees to be able to grow still within an organization. So that gives us the flexibility of those employees to move along what we call a range. And then just ability to cash out floating holidays, and you can see some additional negotiated terms in the the agenda item that was presented for you.
Thank you.
Oh, and one last thing, all increases to the 1% were approved in your budget on June 7th.
Oh, cool. Thank you.
So there's no additional budget adjustments that you need to make in relation to this contract.
Any council member questions or comments? Councilmember Such.
On page 5 of this agreement, page 40 of the packet, number C, in any case where by reason of unusual circumstances, rigid adherence to the preceding provisions related to salary adjustments would cause a manifest injustice, the city council may take such order relating thereto as in its discretion as proper. Can you give me an example of a manifest injustice?
That is old language trying to think, Chris.
In a new document. I love the King James Bible.
So, I mean, in my circumstances, that you would think that there's any type of salary adjustment of an employee that's not, I would have to research for you.
Yeah, it sounds like a mechanism for someone to appeal to the city council. Is that what you?
Yes.
A mechanism, what?
It's just an old language that was left in.
It would, yeah. No.
I just thought it was weird. No, it's page 40.
It's page 40.
Number C.
Letter C.
That was a negotiated term for previous. I'd have to come back and give you the exact example of that.
And do you have, I have another question on F on the same page. What is the budget implication for the F step? I can't remember. That was, I know it was budgeted.
As of this point right now, it's very minimal because it's very limited employees.
To very few employees.
Very few employees. I believe only 2 would qualify for the F step at this point. Yes.
Okay.
Different world from the private sector.
Yeah. Okay, so looking for any public comment on this item. Don't raise your hands all at once. I don't see any public comment. So we'll bring it back to the council.
I actually have another question.
Councilmember Such.
On page 11 or page 46, the very top line that it's talking about workers' comp. Isn't workers' comp paid at full salary? Isn't workers' comp paid at full salary? I mean, if you get hurt on the job, because.
So Chris, on workers' comp. So the city will, looking at the workers' comp section, the city will allow for an employee when requested in writing to the city administrator the option not to use any leave balances. Is workers' comp, I don't believe it's paid in full salary, right?
It's not paid,
Yeah.
it's 60%.
So then you just supplement it with your paid time off?
Yes.
Okay, huh, that's interesting. Okay. And so Juneteenth is going to be added to the holidays?
Yes, it will be added to the holidays as a floating holiday. This was agreed upon before Friday.
Yeah, well, yeah, no one knew about that before Friday. That's it for my questions. Sorry.
Okay.
Thanks.
Anyone else? Yes, we're looking for a motion and a second.
Move to approve resolution number 06-21-2021A. That's all. Oh, and authorize the mayor to sign.
And I will second that.
Okay. Motion by Councilmember Garaventa, second by Mayor Pro Tem Plummer. Roll call vote, please.
Mayor Hawkins,
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Plummer,
Aye.
Councilmember Garaventa,
Aye.
Councilmember Segerstrom, and Councilmember Such.
Aye.
Passes 5-0. On to item number 7, adopt resolution 621-2021B, approving employee salary schedules for the Sonora Employees Association and the Sonora Police Officers Association. Mary Rose.
So this item again is coming from myself and Chris Gorski, actually. And this is in relation to what you just agreed to for the contract. So this salary range now represents that 1% increase and what that range, those ranges would look like. And it also includes the addition of the F step. So again, taking into account what was just approved on the last item, this is what that new salary range would look like for your Sonora Employees Association. Your second your second salary range is taking care of a particular position, your police records technician. This position had been, it had had a specific pay since 2013. And so since that time, we've needed to clean up that pay scale. And so this position now shows a full salary range, that police records technician for that particular position, along with an F step. So it doesn't show any particular increases because we have not negotiated any particular increases for SPOA. It's just specifically looking at that police records technician position, ranging it out and adding that F step.
Yeah, it also includes community development specialist too in the SEA job salary schedule.
That's correct as well.
Okay, any questions or comments? Okay, then I will ask for public comment. Any public comment on this item? I don't see any public comment either. Great, we'll bring it back to the council. Any other discussion or a motion or a second is what I'm looking for?
I will move to approve resolution 06-21-2021-B.
I'll
I second that.
I'm gonna give it to Such.
I think she beat you.
Doesn't matter.
Okay, so motion by Councilmember Garaventa, seconded by Councilmember Such. Roll call vote, please.
Mayor Hawkins,
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Plummer,
Aye.
Councilmember Garaventa,
Aye.
Councilmember Segerstrom, and Councilmember Such.
Aye.
Okay, passes 5-0. On to item number 8, consideration to extend the deadline for 2 public member applications for Vision Sonora.
So on April 19th, council members, the city council approved expanding the number of the Vision Sonora committee on recommendation by the Vision Sonora committee to 9 members total and to include 2 members of the public. At that time, an application period was open with a deadline set of May 25th, 2021. During that time, by that deadline, the city has only received 1 valid application. We actually received 2 applications, one of which was a city resident and the other one was not. And so at this time, in recommendation by your mayor, who makes recommendations for committee appointments, the mayor is asking to extend that deadline to be able to allow for additional members of the public to apply, but also taking into account to ensure that 1 valid application is part of the application process, so that application would still be able to be reviewed. Staff is recommending a new deadline of July 16th. And at this time, I'll entertain any questions.
So I'll start off real quick and just say, we had 1 city resident apply. I plan on, after this deadline closes, calling all of the people. I just want to throw that out there. And then again, making sure that this is a democratic process. This part is part of the democratic process in our city. So that's part I would like to follow by having more applications, and I will call them and we'll go from there. If the council likes them, then it happens. If not, then we'll go from there. But I do plan on talking to everyone. Councilmember Such.
I asked this last time and I'm going to ask it again. And that is that and thank you for extending the application so that we can get hopefully more applicants. But I would also ask that we extend the application requirement to beyond the city limits. That was actually part of the reason for extending this to 9 people was to be able to attract the people who were on the original Vision Sonora group who did all the work. And there are some very talented, dedicated, passionate people who were excluded from this because they don't live in the city limits, but they have been part of this process since it started. And I would like the net to be extended to include them.
Anyone else? Are we even able to really debate this part since we're only discussing? I'm not trying to
No,
cut
I
this part
understand.
down. I want to make sure we're in the right here. Are we even able to debate this part?
Well, you can
Because
give
it's-
direction to that.
I mean, I still feel the same way I did before. I've talked to several city residents that didn't realize, and I failed to tell them that it was open. One individual that I know that I think this council will all agree upon. But again, it's a council's decision. I still feel the same way I did before. Just have to disagree with you on this one, Colette, but I can also see your point, but I'd have to disagree, so.
They're the ones that have done all the work. And I think it's disrespectful not to include them in this myself, just because we think we need to limit it to the city. They've been very, very active, and there's a lot of talent that we're excluding.
Well, it's not like they can't participate.
It's not the same.
Well, maybe not, but it's, we're the residents of the city of Sonora, and this is a city of Sonora project. And, we keep wanting to bring people from the county into different things, and I just don't agree with that. I think, if you look at the membership, if you even including the 9, well, don't include the 9, include the 7. There's only 2 members of that committee of the 7 that live in the city. And that's the city council members, because staff lives outside in the county supervisors live out in the county. And Darren, I guess Darren is the other one, right?
Yes.
And he doesn't even live in the county. So.
Who doesn't live in the county?
Darren, he's moved. So, this is basically a downtown Sonora really project. And I think that there needs to be representation from the citizens that are most directly affected by that, and that's the people who live in the city. So,
I'd argue that the whole county is affected by what Vision Sonora does in the city myself. I think it's not just the city residents who are affected.
Yeah, well, they have representation.
And they can participate. They can
It's not the same.
participate, well.
Not the same. It isn't.
And
I mean, we all know it's not the same. I mean, we can play lip service to that, but it's not the same.
I'm not playing with it. I mean, if we have half the people involved from outside the city already, only the 2 city council people are in the city, then that becomes de facto sort of an ex-city committee. And I can't add anything to what Jim said. It was.
Well, I would argue
Very
that
well.
it's nice the county supervisor is on the committee, but he doesn't really actively participate.
Nope.
And
That's who does the
Darren
work.
Grossi, I don't think so. So, it's kind of, I think, specious just to say that the committee, is representing the rest of the county, I think. But I know 2 people that would like to apply that do happen to live in the city. So, whatever way it goes, I would just argue that, the committee makeup as it is not exactly representative of the county. But
Okay. So we will, anyone else want to speak? Okay, so we will look for any public comment on this matter.
If you have any public comment for this item, please raise your hand using the raise your hand feature or dial *9 if you're on a phone. And I don't see any public comment, council members.
Okay, so we'll bring it back to the council. The only other thing I'll say on this is that one of the biggest reasons Social Equity Committee was a whole different matter. I've some members of the public have tried to get it intertwined, and it's a different scenario and a different situation. With Vision Sonora, we're deciding a lot of where the city of Sonora's residents' taxpayer money is going to be spent. And in that's why I believe that right now it should stay inside the city limits of Sonora. So I guess I'm looking for a motion in a second.
So I'll move to extend the deadline to the Vision Sonora for applications for Vision Sonora to July 16th, 2021, residents of the city.
Second.
Okay, motion by Councilmember Garaventa, second by Mayor Pro Tem Plummer. Roll call vote, please.
Mayor Hawkins?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Plummer?
Aye.
Councilmember Garaventa?
Aye.
Councilmember Segerstrom?
Aye.
And Councilmember Such?
Nope. No.
Okay, passes 4-1. Next is the monthly reports. And then after that, council member and department head reports. I will start with our police chief. I wasn't trying to catch you too much off guard. I know you're busy working still.
That's all right. I just wanted to share. I know each of you fully realize the importance of having a solid policy and procedure manual, especially for the police department, and that we contract with Lexipol for a lot of the research and the policy building templates. And policy is a lot of maintenance. There's training involved. There's compliance and acknowledgements involved. So it's a constant ongoing process to manage our policy manual. And of course, the policy manual and compliance to such is going to be at the center of any type of litigation. So it's really important to us that we keep on top of things and make sure that our employees are doing our Lexipol trainings, policy acknowledgements, and that we're keeping up to date on all the required policies. So Lexipol, who we do contract with, they recently awarded the Sonora Police Department a Bronze Excellence Award for excellence in law enforcement policy management. So if you want to pass that around. So just wanted to share that. Felt pretty good to get that in the mail and a little acknowledgement letter. So
Yeah, neat.
Excellent, thank you. Our fire chief isn't here, so are there any updates from the fire department? Yeah. Okay, so I will ask Rochelle to come up if there's anything.
I have nothing tonight.
You have been a wealth of knowledge tonight. I just want to say thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so next I will ask our city attorney. If the city attorney, I don't even remember your name, I apologize.
Scott. No reports from the city attorney.
Well, thank you, and we thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Next is our city administrator.
I actually have a couple of items. Number one, we had talked about bringing back a repeal of the urgency ordinance for special outdoor operations permit on this meeting. However, in consultation with Deputy City Attorney Nubia Goldstein and Rochelle Kellogg, we based on the direction of city council, we need to ensure that the encroachment permit process is the process in which the city council directed us to be able to have those businesses have an encroachment system whereby when we repeal the special outdoor operations permit, they'll be able to go directly into an encroachment process. So we need to revamp that encroachment process just a bit. And so that'll come back before the council here in July for the repealing of the ordinance and allowing for the encroachment process. I still also need to ensure that I communicate with the one restaurant owner, Diamondback, about what the council had directed on Leineberg Street there. So we wanted to make sure we got enough time to get that all under our belt before we brought back any type of repeal to the city council. Number two is I just want to remind the public that we will be meeting, our next city council meeting will be actually Tuesday, July 6th. The city of Sonora will be recognizing Monday, July 5th as their 4th of July holiday because 4th of July is on a Sunday. So I just want to remind the public. And then also at that time on July 6th, we are anticipating to have that as our first open public meeting based on the opening from the governor on June 15th. So the public will be allowed to meet in chambers on July 6th. Chris and I, or Chris mostly, is scrambling right now to make sure that we have the ability for members of the public to be able to view a streamed city council meeting online. However, if you would like to give public comment to the city council, it will be done in person here in the city council chambers. So we will have a streaming mechanism online, but we will not have the ability to call in via Zoom going forward from July 6th. So again, if you would like to make public comment, please do so at our open city council chambers, which have not been open since March of 2020. So it's going to be quite different going forward. So those are all of the updates I'd like to provide to the council.
Excellent. Councilmember, oh, sorry, Chris. Okay, Councilmember Garavena.
Alrighty, attended on Wednesday, June the 9th, I attended the Board Supervisors, well, I guess it's Solid Waste Committee. It's a function of the County Board of Supervisors. Also attended the Tuolumne County Transportation Council, and then also attended on Monday, June 14th, attended the LAFCO meeting. And then I just did want to make a comment on one of the comments that was made earlier in this meeting by downtown business owner. He shouldn't flatter himself that I was actually checking him out, because I was actually at the just had gotten off work and was looking for my significant other downtown, and I was going up and down both Washington Street and Green Street between the Coffle Park and flying up and going through Main Street in search of her, because I knew she was downtown and I had to work. I think he should also think twice about threatening a council member, a citizen of America, a citizen of California, a citizen of the county, and a citizen of the city of Sonora for using the public byways. Just because I didn't vote for his wanting to close his street for the I had a different opinion about the street being closed, because I believe it's a more important thoroughfare. I guess I'll just leave it at that. I wasn't spying on him at all. I wouldn't want to be on his property. As a matter of fact, I have no intention of being on his property anymore again, although I have been at his business in the past. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Segerstrom.
I missed a special meeting of the Central Sierra Economic Development. There's another D there. I can't remember what it is. Anyway, and my alternate couldn't attend either, but Cole Prisbilla reported on broadband connectivity for member counties. So I'm sure that we will be catching up on that. I attended a mayor's and council members roundtable for the Cal Cities, and reopening the council chambers was one of the key issues that people were talking about, and the pros and cons. Also American Rescue Plan distribution and proposed uses. I am concerned about the opening of the city council chambers. What are we doing about unvaccinated people? I mean, it's, there's been, usually unvaccinated people have to be masked. But, and there has been a case of a vaccinated citizen here in Sonora and Tuolumne County contracting COVID. And I guess there's no way for city council members to have a remote participation. So those are my comments.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Sutch.
Should we not expect a response to that question? Because I think we deserve one.
Well, these are reports, right?
I think the governor made it very clear that going forward, we are fine and that public meetings will resume. We'll start taking
Right.
public comment.
But unvaccinated people are expected to wear masks.
Okay.
That's a recommendation, I guess.
It's an expectation.
But the science is that if you've been vaccinated, you're good. And
just told us
there are going to be some exceptions. There are other people who talk about how many people have died from the vaccinations. There are going to be coincidences for things like that, but the main thrust of the science is if you've been vaccinated, you are safe. That's the whole point of the vaccination, and you as a medical person know that better than I.
Well, that you perhaps won't need hospitalization. Not that you're safe, but you won't need hospitalization. The vaccination will prevent you from needing hospitals, probably most likely prevent you from needing hospitalization, but there also are all kinds of side effects to having COVID. I mean, there's a huge uptick in type 2 diabetes, for instance, from people who were even had asymptomatic disease. So it's a
very serious disease.
And there's new variants, and
the Delta variant is pretty deadly.
So
did you want me to just report on a step?
I guess so.
So there's no way for me to actually validate who's vaccinated and who's not. I know we had talked about from a staff perspective that we will be posting signage that those that are unvaccinated to please wear a mask. But I can't ask for vaccination cards for people to come into the chambers.
I was just asking.
Well, I have done thus as long as the governor asked us to. And that's why, I mean, it's no personal disrespect to you. The reason I wore a mask, even though I absolutely resent and hate the thing, was out of respect for you and Ann. And I did it as long as it was asked for by the governor. And now that he says we're good without them, and that society is maybe not 100% safe, but we're never 100% safe. Just crossing the street is pretty dangerous here. And we're pretty good. And so I'm sorry if it causes offense at this point, but because that's not a design. But I cannot think, I cannot talk. It makes me crazy and my mind not work. So.
Okay. So is that all that you had, Mark?
No,
Okay.
I'm letting Colette finish. Oh,
Okay,
I'm sorry.
So moving on the 8th, I actually went to Tuolumne to the Resiliency Center groundbreaking, which, it was sort of, it was actually an interesting day, and pretty good attendance, I thought, with a lot of gratitude for the people who have helped put this together. attended TCTC and Tuolumne County Stanislaus Irwin, and a whole great presentation on I like stormwater reclamation, and there was a great presentation. I keep bringing it up. I can get the video if people want to watch it, because it's actually a pretty interesting project, and there's grant money for it. So anyhow, that's it for me.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Mayor Pro Tem.
So this is hard for me, and I'm sorry about that. I haven't consulted staff because they are the afflicted victims in this case. And so it's going to surprise them, and they're going to maybe feel that I have thrown a bomb into the water. But we've had a lot of talk about the Social Equity Committee. And unfortunately, the tone of that committee has become patently and hostile to white people, to men in particular, white males in particular, but any white people. And I would suggest that everybody in this county watch the, June 14 meeting, starting at 30 minutes, go past 47. Councilman Garaventa tried to bring this to a level of discussion where it is not using racist terms or describing people by race or gender or age. So did Darren. And it has become and I'm speaking to the council because really this leaves the staff out of the equation. But I think that we really, just to cover our asses, must stop these meetings until we come up with some level of decorum or expectation, so that we're not using race, gender, sexuality, size, height, whatever, as descriptive terms for the people. That we're trying to do this to bring the city together and to have something worthwhile, and instead is becoming hate-filled, and it is a hostile work environment. And as a council, we cannot let it go on until this is rectified. Our staff should not be subjected to this. And I could say a lot more about the resolutions and stuff. I think you have a great one if you just copy Placerville's. It's great. It covers everything. We don't need decades to come up with a resolution. Maybe you were misquoted in the paper, but said we need to be doing this for decades. We don't need decades. Well, that happens sometimes, and I'm willing to accept that. But that's what the paper printed, and since this is the only outlet where we can talk to each other about this, I'm happy to have you rebut things that are wrong. But as far as being hostile, we are lucky not to have had any lawsuits brought against us thus far, and it's getting worse every meeting that I have seen. I haven't seen the several prior to the 14th, but I have seen probably half of them are better.
So I just want to remind the council, I didn't mean to interrupt Councilmember Plummer, but I just want to remind that we have not agendized this item. So I just want you to be aware that.
I am understanding, but this is something that needs to come to be agendized, and for the council to deal with this forthwith if we want to have anything to do with this Social Equity Committee as it stands now. This is very important to the health of this city, the financial health. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. I'm in the process of watching the last couple Social Equity Committee meetings. I've tried to purposely stay out because this is your and Jim's group, just out of respect to you two. I'll go in and watch them. I'm in the process of doing it, so we can go there. wanted to leave everything on a happy note. We've accomplished, I think, a lot tonight. It was a little bit of a tough meeting, and I thank everyone. And I thank the public for watching and look forward to seeing people back in here again. So we will close the meeting at 8:52.